In the 41st millennium, there is only war. The Imperium of man spans 1,000,000 worlds, each one a fortress against the darkness that hungers beyond the stars. Faith is the only shield against annihilation, and hope is a luxury measured in the seconds before death. On the angry world of Vardus Prime, that death descended from the void on wings of chitin and hunger incarnate. The sky had turned wrong 3 days ago. Not the familiar crimson of warp breach, nor the sickly green of orc invasion craft. The stars themselves seemed to dim, as if something vast and ancient had positioned itself between Vardus and the light of the galaxy. Then the spores began to fall, great seed pods the size of dropships, crashing through the atmosphere in their millions, splitting open to birth nightmares that defied sanity. The Tyranids had come to feed. The Colonel Heskar Vorn stood atop the hastily erected adamantium barricades of Hive Tertius, watching through his magnoculars as the horizon writhed with movement. 20 years commanding the 84th Vardus Regiment had taught him to recognize when a battle was already lost. The Vox channels screamed with reports of outlying settlements gone dark, of agri-combines consumed down to the bedrock, of PDF battalions simply vanishing into the advancing biomass. Movement at 3 kilometers. His auger servitor droned, its mechanical voice devoid of the fear that gripped every human heart on that wall. Estimated bioforms, 700,000 and rising. Classification, termagants, hormagants, Carnifex variants, synapse creature detected. Recommend immediate withdrawal to secondary defensive line. Recommendation denied, Vorn replied, but his voice steady despite the cold certainty settling in his gut. The God Emperor protects. We hold until relieved or until death claims us. Behind him, 15,000 guardsmen checked their laser guns and whispered prayers to the Golden Throne. They were farmers and factory workers, pressed into service when the planetary governor had activated the general muster. Most had never fired a weapon in anger before this week. Now they would die defending a wall against a tide of alien hunger that would strip their world to its mantle. The first wave hit like a living tsunami. Termagants scuttled forward on 4 legs, their flesh-bore weapons spitting grubs that burrowed into flesh and bone. Behind them, hormagants bounded across the corpse fields in great leaping strides, scything talons extended. The guardsmen opened fire, las beams lancing into the swarm by the thousands. Tyranids fell, their alien flesh charred and burst, but for every one that died, 10 more surged forward to feast on the corpse. "Hold the line," Vorn roared, his power sword igniting with a crackle of disruption field energy. "For the Emperor, for Vardus!" The wall became a charnel house. Guardsmen died screaming as bioweapons dissolved their bodies from the inside out. Hormagants vaulted the barricades, their talons carving through flak armor like parchment. Vorn killed 3 of the creatures himself, his power sword cleaving through chitin and sinew, but he could feel the inevitable conclusion rushing toward them like a freight train. Then the sky tore open. Not a warp rift. Vorn knew that particular brand of horror intimately. This was something else entirely. And the air itself seemed to split along invisible seams, reality peeling back like burned skin, and through the wound in space poured light of a quality that had no place in the 41st millennium. It was clean, pure, the kind of light that belonged in children's stories about ancient terror before the Age of Strife, before humanity learned that the universe was fundamentally hostile to hope. Something fell through the breach, trailing golden fire. It moved too fast for mortal eyes to track, a blur of red and blue that screamed across the sky faster than an orbital lance strike. The shockwave of its passage shattered the leading edge of the Tyranid swarm, alien bodies pulverized by atmospheric displacement alone. Then it struck the ground in the center of the xenos horde with a thunderclap that Vorn felt in his bones. The Tyranids surrounding the impact crater simply ceased to exist, vaporized by kinetic force that turned chitin and synapse fluid into constituent atoms. For a heartbeat, the entire battlefield fell silent. Then the figure rose from the crater, and Colonel Heskar Vaughn felt his faith in the empirical universe shatter like cheap glass. She was humanoid, female, young, perhaps 20 Terran standard years, with golden hair that defied the ash-choked air and skin that seemed to radiate its own luminescence. She wore a costume of blue and red, adorned with a symbol that looked almost like the Imperial Aquila, but fundamentally wrong. An angular glyph that hurt to look at, as if it belonged to a geometric system the human mind wasn't meant to process. But it was her eyes that froze Vaughn's blood. They glowed, actually glowed, on twin points of blue fire that swept across the Tyranid horde with an intensity that made auger arrays look like candles. "What in the Emperor's name?" Vaughn whispered. The girl, for she looked barely older than a girl, despite the impossible power radiating from her like heat from a forge, turned to face the Tyranid swarm. She floated half a meter off the ground, defying gravity with the casual ease of a tech priest's anti-grav harness. But there was no technology visible on her person. No servo motors, no suspensor fields, just her. A Carnifex, a living tank of bioengineered muscle and rage, charged her position, its screams echoing across the battlefield like a demon's howl. She moved. One moment she hovered in place. The next, she had crossed 50 meters in a fraction of a second, meeting the Carnifex's charge head-on. Her fist, a human fist, unaugmented by power armor or bionics, struck the creature's armored carapace with a sound like a thunderhammer impact. The Carnifex's entire torso exploded, bone shrapnel and ichor spraying across the battlefield as the massive bioform was thrown backward with such force it tumbled through a dozen smaller Tyranids like a macabre bowling ball. Vaughn's jaw hung open. That Carnifex had weathered direct Lascanon fire. He'd seen one shrug off a crack missile to the spine, and this girl had just punched it into paste. She landed, her boots touching xenos' corpses with almost delicate precision, and looked back at the Imperial wall. Even at 200 meters, Vaughn could feel the weight of that gaze. Curiosity mixed with concern, intelligence that assessed the situation in microseconds. "Are you all right?" she called out, and her voice carrying clearly across the battlefield despite the absence of Vox amplification. Her accent was strange, the pronunciation of Gothic slightly off, as if she'd learned the language from a dialect that hadn't existed in 10,000 years. Before Vaughn could respond, the swarm adapted. That was the horror of the Tyranids. They learned. 100 hormagaunts changed trajectory mid-leap, converging on the golden-haired newcomer from every angle. Bioweapons spat their venomous loads. Barbed stranglers whipped through the air, seeking to entangle and crush. The girl blurred into motion. She was everywhere. Moving faster than the human eye could process, she wove between attacks that should have been impossible to dodge, each movement economical and precise. A hormagaunt leaped at her back. She spun and caught it by the throat, and then threw it into 3 of its fellows with such force that all 4 aliens shattered against each other like ceramic plates. Bioacid splashed across her costume and hissed, then simply slid off, leaving not even a scorch mark. Her eyes flared brighter, and twin beams of crimson light lanced from them like lass weapons crossed with melta fire. The beams swept across the swarm, and everywhere they touched, Tyranids burned. Not with promethium flame, but with a heat so intense, it bypassed combustion entirely and went straight to plasma. Termagants were sliced in half. A warrior form's synapse crown was severed with surgical precision, sending the lesser creatures around it into directionless frenzy. "Emperor's throne," breathed Sergeant Callis beside Vaughn. "Is she one of the Primarch's Get? A living saint manifested?" Vaughn had no answer. And living saints were miracles of faith made flesh, sustained by the Emperor's will and wreathed in holy fire. They didn't punch Carnifexes to death with their bare hands. They didn't move like orbital strike packages made human. and they certainly didn't wear symbols that made his eyes water when he looked too closely. The girl? No, he needed to stop thinking of her as a girl. Nothing that powerful could be diminished by such mundane terminology. The entity continued her systematic dismantling of the Tyranid vanguard. She caught a ravenous charging strike and used the serpentine creature's own momentum to swing it into a knot of termagants. She flew, actually flew, with no visible means of propulsion, above a cluster of carnifexes and unleashed another burst of heat vision that carved through their dorsal carapaces like a power sword through parchment. In 3 minutes, she had killed more Tyranids than Vorn's entire regiment had managed in 3 days. Then the temperature on the battlefield dropped by 20 degrees in an instant, and every man on that wall felt the psychic pressure that meant something worse had arrived. The swarm parted like a sea of flesh and chitin, and through the gap strode something that made even the hardened veterans of the 84th take an involuntary step backward. The Hive Tyrant was 4 meters of perfectly engineered murder, its crown of psychic protrusions crackling with synaptic energy. It carried bone swords longer than a man was tall, with each blade dripping with venoms that could liquefy ceramite. Behind it, the lesser Tyranids reorganized with disturbing speed, their movements now coordinated by the presence of the Alpha Synapse creature. The Golden Woman turned to face it, and for the first time, Vorn saw something cross her features that might have been concern. "Big guy," she muttered, loud enough for enhanced auspex to pick up and relay to the command post. "Okay, I can work with big." The tyrant shrieked, a psychic scream that sent 3 guardsmen into seizures and cracked the lenses of Vorn's magnoculars. It charged with shocking speed for something so massive, its bone sword singing through the air in patterns that spoke of horrifying intelligence. She met it head-on. The clash sent a shockwave rippling across the battlefield, and sword met fist with a sound like a ship's hull buckling. The tyrant's blade should have severed her arm at the shoulder. Instead, it bounced, the bioweapon's edge unable to pierce skin that looked entirely human, but possessed the durability of something far beyond mortal flesh. The fight that followed was beyond anything in Vorn's experience. The Hive Tyrant was a masterpiece of biological warfare, its every movement calculated by the vast intelligence of the Hive Mind itself. But the woman matched it, blow for blow, her speed allowing her to deflect strikes that could carve through tank armor, her strength letting her grapple with a creature that weighed several tons. She grabbed one of its bone swords mid-strike and snapped it, the bioweapon breaking like kindling in her grip. The tyrant adapted, and its secondary arms lashing out with scything talons that caught her across the midsection and sent her tumbling backward through a ruined hab block. For a moment, Vorn thought she was done. Nothing survived a direct hit from a Hive Tyrant's full strength. Nothing human, anyway. Then she rose from the rubble, brushing dust from her costume, completely unharmed. Her eyes blazed brighter, and when she spoke, there was steel in her voice that reminded Vorn of Commissar Yarek's legendary defiance. "All right," she said, floating back into the air with her fists clenched. "No more pulling punches." She moved so fast she seemed to teleport, appearing directly in front of the tyrant's face. Her fist pistoned forward and through the creature's armored cranium, punching out the back of its skull in a spray of brain matter and synaptic fluid. The massive bioform staggered, its limbs spasming as the Hive Mind's connection was violently severed. She withdrew her arm, impossibly clean, the gore simply sliding off her skin, and delivered an uppercut that lifted the tyrant's multi-ton body off the ground and sent it crashing through 3 separate buildings. The swarm recoiled. For the first time in recorded Imperial history, Vorn watched Tyranids retreat not from superior firepower or defensive positions, but from a single individual. The lesser creatures scattered like insects, dragging their dead into the biomass reclamation pools with frantic urgency. The Golden Woman descended slowly, landing atop the ruined barricade beside Vorn. Up close, he could see that she was breathing hard, a thin sheen of something like sweat on her forehead. but otherwise seemed entirely unharmed by a fight that should have killed a space marine in full Terminator plate. "Hi," she said, offering a smile that was so genuine, so filled with warmth and relief, that Vaughn felt something in his chest he hadn't experienced in 20 years of warfare. Hope. "I'm Kara Zor-El. I'm not sure where I am, but it looks like you could use some help." Vaughn opened his mouth to respond, but before he could form words, the Vox network exploded with urgent transmissions. High orbit. Inquisitorial authority codes. Orders to secure the unidentified entity by any means necessary. He looked at this Kara, this impossible savior who had just slaughtered her way through a Tyranid horde like the Emperor's own wrath made manifest. Herman felt the crushing weight of duty settle on his shoulders like a leaden shroud. In the 41st millennium, there is only war, and miracles, it seemed, were just another form of threat to be catalogued and contained. If you crave stories of cosmic collisions where hope itself becomes the ultimate heresy, smash that subscribe button. The Emperor protects those who bear witness to the impossible in the dark millennium. Kara floated 3 meters above the corpse-strewn battlefield, her enhanced hearing picking up a dozen simultaneous conversations from the fortified wall. The soldiers, and they were clearly soldiers, despite their strange uniforms and archaic-looking weapons, were arguing amongst themselves in frantic whispers. She caught fragments. "Contact the Inquisition. Could be a demon. Living Saint Manifestation. Kill it before it kills us." That last one made her frown. She'd just saved their lives, saved their entire city from the look of things. Those creatures, whatever they were, had been about to overrun this position completely. She'd seen the fear in the defenders' eyes, the resignation of people who knew they were about to die. And now they were talking about killing her. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," she called out, keeping her voice gentle despite her confusion. "I know this looks strange, but I'm on your side. Those things..." She gestured at the retreating swarm of chitinous nightmares. "They were going to destroy you. I stopped them." The man she'd spoken to earlier, the one with the weathered face and officer's insignia, stepped forward. His hand rested on an ornate sword at his hip, and she noticed his knuckles were white with tension. Up close, she could see the exhaustion etched into every line of his face, the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from too many battles and too little hope. "Identify yourself," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "By what authority do you manifest on Vardis Prime? What is your designation, your chapter, your nature?" Kara descended slowly, making sure her movements were non-threatening. She'd learned long ago that people tended to get nervous around displays of power they couldn't understand. "My name is Kara Zor-El. I'm from, well, I guess you'd call it another dimension, another reality. I'm not entirely sure what happened, but I was trying to access the Phantom Zone and something went wrong with the portal technology. Next thing I knew, I was falling through some kind of tear in space and... warp breach," someone muttered from the ranks. "It came through the Imperium. It's demon-touched." "I'm not a demon," Kara said firmly, her frustration starting to show. "I'm Kryptonian. From Earth. Well, originally from Krypton, but I've lived on Earth since I was a teenager. I'm a hero. I help people." The officer's expression didn't change, but she saw his jaw tighten. "Earth is the holy throne world of the God Emperor. Blessed be his name. And there are no Kryptonians in any Imperial record. You speak Gothic with an accent that doesn't match any known sector dialect. You employ technology that violates at least 7 Mechanicus edicts against abominable intelligence. And you claim to have breached the warp without corruption." He drew his sword, a weapon that crackled with some kind of energy field, similar to the disruption tech she'd seen in advanced civilizations, but cruder somehow. "I'm Colonel Hesker Vaughn of the 84th Vardis Regiment, and I'm placing you under military custody until inquisitorial forces arrive to determine your nature." Comply peacefully, and you will not be harmed. Kara's eyes widened. You can't be serious. I just saved... The air behind Vaughn shimmered, and then 3 figures materialized from what looked like active camouflage. They wore armor, even bulkier than the soldiers, painted in deep crimson and black, covered with strange symbols and purity seals. Each one carried a weapon that made Kara's Kryptonian-educated mind scream warnings, some kind of magnetic acceleration rifle crossed with explosive rounds, far more dangerous than the simple laser weapons the regular troops used. "Stand down, Colonel," one of them said, their voice mechanically distorted. "This is now an inquisitorial matter." Vaughn stepped back immediately, though Kara could see the conflict in his eyes. The newcomer advanced, and Kara noticed the symbol on their armor, a stylized eye with a skull at its center. Through her X-ray vision, she could see the person inside the armor was human, heavily augmented, but human. Their heart rate was elevated but controlled, and they had their finger on the trigger of their weapon. "I'm Interrogator Maxis of the Ordo Xenos," the figure announced. "You are an unidentified entity displaying abilities consistent with advanced xenotech or warp manifestation. You will surrender immediately for questioning and analysis, or you will be terminated with extreme prejudice." "I already told him," Kara began, but Maxis cut her off. "Your words are irrelevant. Your very existence violates the natural order. You claim to be human but demonstrate capabilities beyond even the Emperor's finest creations. You appear in the midst of a Tyranid invasion bearing no signs of biomass corruption. You wielded what appeared to be heat-based ocular weapons of unknown origin." Maxis raised their weapon. "That these facts suggest either xenotech integration, demonic possession, or a xenos infiltrator species. All 3 outcomes require immediate containment." Kara felt her frustration boiling over. She'd dealt with paranoid governments before. LexCorp's private security, secret military divisions, even hostile alien civilizations. But this was something else. These people seemed genuinely convinced that saving lives made her more suspicious, not less. "I'm trying to help," she said, her voice tight. "There's an invasion happening right now. Thousands, maybe millions of those creatures out there trying to kill everyone on this planet. And you want to waste time interrogating me instead of letting me stop them?" "The Tyranid threat is being managed according to standard protocols," Maxis replied coldly. "Your interference, while temporarily advantageous, has disrupted tactical planning and introduced an unknown variable into theater operations. The Hive Mind will adapt to your presence. You may have signed this world's death warrant with your reckless intervention." That stopped Kara cold. "What?" "No, I weakened them. I destroyed their command creature. That should give you time to..." "The Hive Mind is not a singular entity. Fool child," Maxis snapped. "You destroyed one Hive tyrant. The fleet in orbit contains dozens, and now they have witnessed your capabilities, studied your attack patterns, analyzed your biological signatures through the psychic backlash of their deceased organisms. Even now, the swarm is adapting, evolving countermeasures. You have given them data." Kara's super hearing caught the sound before anyone else. A deep and resonant thrumming from somewhere beyond the ruined habs. The ground beneath their feet began to vibrate with a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. A massive, alien heartbeat. "Contact!" someone screamed from the wall. "Multiple bioforms inbound. They're Emperor's throne. They're different." Kara's vision shifted into the telescopic spectrum, and her breath caught. The Tyranid swarm was returning, but the creatures looked wrong. Their carapaces had taken on a strange metallic sheen. Not true metal, but some kind of biomineral composite that her enhanced vision identified as having similar refractive properties to her own Kryptonian cellular structure. They were adapting to her heat vision. And in the center of the formation strode something that made the Hive tyrant she'd fought look like a juvenile. It stood 7 meters tall, its body a nightmarish fusion of blade limbs and psychic apparatus. 4 arms, each wielding bone swords that crackled with bioelectric energy. A crown of psychic protrusions that made the air around it shimmer with visible distortion. Swarmlord, her Kryptonian education supplied automatically, accessing xenobiology databases that somehow still functioned despite dimensional displacement. Apex strategic organism. Hive Mind's primary tactical processor. Threat level, extinction class. Swarmlord. Maxis breathed, and Kara heard actual fear in the interrogator's voice for the first time. The Hive Mind deployed the Swarmlord for one contact engagement. The creature's psychic presence washed over the battlefield like a tidal wave of alien intelligence. Kara felt it brush against her mind. Not hostile, not yet. Unanalyzing, like a scientist studying a new specimen. She could feel its consciousness dividing its attention across 1 million different organisms simultaneously, each one a sensory node feeding data back to its vast intellect. And all of it was focused on her. "This is your fault," Maxis hissed, whirling on Kara. "The Hive Mind considers you a significant enough threat to deploy its most valuable asset. It will study you, adapt to you, and then consume you along with this entire world. Billions will die because you couldn't restrain yourself from playing hero." The words hit harder than any physical blow. Kara had faced criticism before, had been blamed for collateral damage and unintended consequences. But this was different. This was a universe that seemed fundamentally opposed to the very concept of heroism, where saving lives could somehow make things worse. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "I just saw people in danger and—" "Ignorance is no excuse," Maxis cut her off. "You are a weapon without a targeting system, a catastrophe waiting to happen. This is why the Imperium exists, to control and direct such forces toward the Emperor's will. Unchecked power is heresy." The Swarmlord's army reached the outer perimeter. The soldiers on the wall opened fire, their laser weapons flashing in coordinated volleys. The Tyranids absorbed the damage with barely a pause, their new bio-armor dispersing the energy across hardened carapace plates. They'd adapted, just like Maxis said they would. Kara watched as the first wave hit the barricades, as men died screaming, and felt the weight of impossible choice settling on her shoulders. If she fought, she'd give the swarm more data. If she didn't, everyone here would die anyway. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, hating the uncertainty in her own voice. Maxis lowered their weapon slightly. "Surrender. Allow us to place you in stasis containment. Remove yourself as a variable from this conflict. Let the Imperium fight this war as we have fought 1,000 others, with faith, steel, and acceptable sacrifice." "Acceptable sacrifice," Kara repeated numbly. Through her enhanced vision, she could see 3 soldiers on the western barricade being torn apart by Hormagaunts. "How many people is it acceptable to lose?" "All of them," Maxis said simply. "If it means preventing the Tyranids from acquiring whatever technology or capability you represent, every life on this world is an acceptable price. So that is the calculus of survival in the 41st millennium." Kara felt something cold settle in her chest. This wasn't Earth. This wasn't even her universe. These people didn't think like anyone she'd ever met. They genuinely seemed to believe that the answer to overwhelming threat was overwhelming sacrifice, that hope itself was somehow dangerous. But she could hear the screams, could see the terror, could count every heartbeat of every person on that wall who would die in the next 5 minutes if something didn't change. She'd been Supergirl for over a decade. She'd saved Earth dozens of times, had fought gods and tyrants and cosmic horrors, and she'd never stood by and watched people die because some authority figure told her it was strategically optimal. "No," she said. Maxis's weapon snapped back up. "That was not a request. Xenos." Kara moved. Not at full speed. She was still feeling the effects of whatever dimensional transition had brought her here, but fast enough that Maxis's enhanced reflexes couldn't track her. She gently pushed the weapon aside, then rose into the air beyond their reach. "I'm sorry," she called down to Vaughn, to Maxis, to all of them. "I know you don't trust me. I know this makes me your enemy, but I can't just stand here and let people die when I have the power to stop it. That's not who I am." She turned toward the advancing Swarmlord, feeling her heart hammering against her ribs. The creature radiated intelligence and malevolence in equal measure, its 4 eyes tracking her movement with disturbing precision. Behind it, the swarm churned like a living sea, hundreds of thousands of organisms operating as a single, terrifyingly efficient weapon. "Fire on the xenos entity," Maxis ordered coldly. "She has refused Imperial authority. She is now an enemy combatant." Last beams lanced up toward Kara, but she dodged them easily, her enhanced reflexes making the attack seem almost slow motion. The shots went wild, one of them punching through a hormigaunt that had been climbing the wall. The Tyranid shrieked and fell, its flesh charred. The Swarmlord raised one of its blade arms and pointed directly at her. The gesture was so deliberate, so clearly intelligent, that Kara felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't just a beast, it was a general, a strategist, and it had just given an order. The sky darkened as something massive descended from the clouds, a flying bioform the size of a city block, and its wings blotting out what little sun penetrated the ash-choked atmosphere. Kara's enhanced vision identified it as a Herodin, a high-altitude assault organism designed to destroy aircraft and drop troops. But it wasn't heading for the city. It was heading for her. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," Kara muttered. The Herodin opened its ventral orifice and vomited a stream of smaller organisms, gargoyles, her educational database informed her, flying troops with flesh borers and poisonous talons. Hundreds of them forming a swirling cloud of death that filled the air between her and the ground. Kara took a deep breath and let it out slowly. She'd fought in 3-dimensional aerial combat before, handled worse odds, faced down Kryptonian war forms and apocalyptian parademons. She could do this. She just wished she understood the rules of this universe well enough to know whether she was helping or making things catastrophically worse. The first gargoyle reached her, and Kara's training took over. She caught it by the wing, spun, and hurled it into 3 of its fellows like a biological missile. The creatures tangled midair and plummeted to the ground. More swarmed in from every angle, their flesh borers spitting grubs that exploded against her skin harmlessly. Below, she heard Interrogator Maxis shouting orders to cease fire, to let the Tyranids handle the xenos infiltrator. The Imperium and the Swarm temporarily united in their desire to contain her. Welcome to the 41st millennium, Kara thought grimly, where saving lives makes you everyone's enemy. The gargoyles died in droves, but they didn't stop coming. For every 3 Kara destroyed, 6 more descended from the Herodin's bulk, their screeches creating a dissonant chorus that would have deafened normal humans. She moved through them like a dancer, each motion precise and economical. Grab, throw, redirect, crush. Her heat vision carved burning paths through clusters of the flying organisms, but she noticed with growing concern that each successive wave took slightly longer to kill. They were learning, adapting their flight patterns, their approach vectors, even the density of their carapace armor. The Hive Mind was using them as test subjects, burning through disposable troops to gather data on her capabilities. Below, the ground battle had devolved into chaos. The Swarmlord directed its forces with terrifying intelligence, splitting the swarm into multiple prongs that struck at the Imperial defenses from coordinated angles. Kara watched in horror as a section of the western wall collapsed under the weight of carnifexes, the massive biotanks using their armored heads as living battering rams. Guardsmen fell screaming into the breach, where smaller Tyranids waited with scything talons. She couldn't be everywhere at once. The realization hit her like a physical blow. For the first time in her career as Supergirl, she was genuinely, completely outmatched not by power, but by scale. There were too many threats, spread across too wide an area, all requiring immediate intervention. A particularly large gargoyle, some kind of alpha variant, dove at her from above, its talons extended and wreathed in bioelectric energy. Kara caught it mid-strike, now feeling the electricity discharge harmlessly across her skin, and was about to throw it when her super hearing caught something that made her heart stop. A child's scream. Somewhere in the Hive city below, beyond the military barricades, in what she'd assumed was evacuated territory. Her head snapped toward the source, X-ray vision penetrating through kilometers of rockcrete and metal. There, in a collapsed hab block 3 sectors east, a family huddled in a basement. Mother, father, 2 children. The building's structural integrity was failing, weakened by the vibrations from nearby Carnifex impacts. 30 seconds, maybe less, before the entire structure pancaked on top of them. Kara looked at the gargoyle in her hands, at the harridan still spewing reinforcements, at the breached wall where guardsmen were fighting and dying, and looked at Interrogator Maxis on the command platform, weapon trained skyward, waiting for a clear shot. "I'm sorry," she whispered to no one in particular, and threw the gargoyle with enough force to send it crashing through 2 of its fellows. Then she moved. The boom of her supersonic acceleration rattled windows across the Hive city. She crossed 3 kilometers in under 2 seconds, her sonic wake shattering already damaged structures in her path. The collateral damage made her wince, but that family had maybe 10 seconds now, and nothing else mattered. She hit the collapsing building like a missile, her arms spread wide to catch the falling debris. Thousands of tons of rockcrete and plasteel crashed down onto her shoulders, and Kara gritted her teeth against the strain. None, it didn't hurt. She'd held up collapsing buildings on Earth dozens of times, but she could feel the weight differently here. Heavier somehow, as if the universe itself was pressing down with the mass. Stellar radiation variance, she thought, her Kryptonian education analyzing her power levels automatically. Solar input approximately 78% of Earth standard. Cellular efficiency decreasing. Estimated time to full acclimation, 47 hours. She didn't have 47 hours. "Hello," she called out, using her X-ray vision to track the family through the rubble. "Can you hear me? I'm here to help." The father, a thin man with augmetic eyes and the calloused hands of a factory worker, stared up at her through a gap in the debris. His expression was pure terror, but Kara couldn't tell if it was fear of the collapsing building or fear of her. "No, please," she said gently. "I need you to move toward my voice. Carefully. The structure's not stable, but I can hold it long enough for you to get clear." "You're the xenos," the man breathed, "the golden demon that fell from the sky." Kara felt something twist in her chest. "I'm not a demon. I'm just someone who doesn't want you and your family to die. Now move." Perhaps it was the urgency in her voice. Or perhaps it was simply that death by crushing was marginally worse than potential death by demon. Either way, the family began crawling through the wreckage toward her. The mother clutched an infant to her chest, while the father half-carried a boy who couldn't have been more than 6. Kara's enhanced hearing picked up the groan of metal stress fractures spreading through the building's skeletal structure. 5 seconds, maybe less. She widened her stance, spreading her feet to distribute the weight more effectively, and felt her muscles burning with effort. Not painful, but noticeable. Another sign that her powers weren't operating at full capacity. The family emerged from the rubble just as the final support beam gave way. Kara waited until they'd stumbled clear, then pushed, hurling the entire mass of debris away from them. It crashed into an already destroyed section of the hab block, sending up a plume of dust and ash. She descended to ground level, checking them over with her X-ray vision. The father had 3 broken ribs and internal bleeding. The mother's arm was fractured. The infant seemed unharmed, and the boy had only minor cuts. all survivable if they could reach medical attention. "There's a field hospital 6 blocks west," Kara said, pointing. Can you make it?" The father nodded slowly, his augmetic eyes whirring as they focused on her face. "Why?" he asked. "Why save us? The Imperium says you're the enemy. The priests say your corruption made manifest. Why risk yourself for strangers?" Kara opened her mouth to respond, then paused. How did you explain hope to people who'd apparently never experienced it? How did you justify compassion in a universe that seemed to run on calculated cruelty? "Because it's the right thing to do," she said finally. "Because you're people, and people matter. All of you matter." The man's eyes widened, and Kara saw something flicker across his face. Not quite belief, but maybe the distant memory of what belief used to feel like. Then his expression hardened, and he grabbed his family and fled without another word. Kara watched them go, but then froze as her super hearing caught the distinctive whine of charging energy weapons. She spun to find Interrogator Maxis standing 50 meters away, flanked by 2 more armored figures. All 3 had weapons trained on her position. "Unauthorized intervention in civilian sectors," Maxis announced, their voice carrying the flat finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. "Desertion from active combat zone. Refusal to submit to Imperial authority. The evidence is conclusive. You are either xenos, demon, or heretic. The prescribed response is the same for all 3. "I just saved that family's lives," Kara said, her patience finally fraying. "How is that a crime?" "You abandoned your position during active combat operations. In doing so, you allowed 17 guardsmen to die on the western barricade when the aerial xenos forces you were engaging redirected to ground assault." Maxis's weapon hummed with building charge. "Their blood is on your hands, xenos. Your reckless compassion has a body count." The words hit like a physical blow. Kara's vision shifted back to telescopic, focusing on the western wall. She could see the bodies, soldiers torn apart by gargoyle talons, their blood staining the rockcrete. 17 men, 17 people with families, with lives, with futures. Dead because she'd chosen to save 4 different people. "I couldn't be in both places," she whispered. "I can't save everyone." "Then you should have stayed on mission," Maxis replied coldly. "Discipline exists for a reason. Strategy exists for a reason. As the Imperium's tactical doctrine is built on 10,000 years of warfare, your emotional decision-making is a liability." Kara felt her hands clenching into fists. "So what was I supposed to do? Let that family die? Calculate which lives are worth more based on military value?" "Yes," Maxis said simply. "That is exactly what you should have done. The family were non-combatants in a doomed sector. The guardsmen were trained soldiers holding a strategic position. The choice was obvious." "Not to me," Kara shot back. "I don't trade lives like that. Every person deserves a chance to survive." "Then you are a fool," Maxis stated flatly. "And fools do not survive the 41st millennium." The interrogator's finger tightened on the trigger, and Kara's enhanced reflexes caught the telltale signs of imminent firing. Muscle tension, respiratory pause, tears the minute shift in stance. She could dodge, could disarm them before the shot even left the barrel, could be gone before they registered her movement. But where would she go? This wasn't Earth. She didn't have a fortress of solitude to retreat to, no DEO allies, no understanding of the local geography or political structures. She was alone in a hostile universe that seemed to view kindness as weakness and sacrifice as currency. The shot never came. Instead, the Vox unit on Maxis's armor crackled to life, and a voice filled with barely controlled panic cut through the standoff. "All units, priority alert! The Swarmlord has breached the primary defense line. Repeat, the Swarmlord is in the city. It's heading directly for Hive Command. Do all available forces converge on..." The transmission cut off in a burst of static and a scream that sounded more psychic than audible. Maxis lowered their weapon fractionally, and Kara could hear the conflict in their breathing pattern. Duty to capture her versus duty to respond to the greater threat. The interrogator's head turned toward the Hive City's center, where Kara's enhanced vision could already see the Swarmlord's massive form carving through buildings like a farmer harvesting wheat. "This isn't over," Maxis said, but there was less certainty in their voice now. "You're still under investigation for—" "I know," Kara interrupted. "Xenos, demon, heretic. You've made your position clear." She rose into the air, her eyes tracking the Swarmlord's path of destruction. "But right now, that thing is killing hundreds of people with every step it takes. So you can either shoot me in the back while I try to stop it, or you can help. Your choice." She didn't wait for a response. Kara accelerated toward the Swarmlord's position, her cape streaming behind her like a banner of defiance against the ash-choked sky. Below, she could hear Maxis barking orders into their Vox, redeploying forces, calling for orbital support that she suspected wouldn't come in time. The Swarmlord stood in the central plaza of Hive Tertius, surrounded by the corpses of what must have been an entire company of guardsmen. Its 4 blade arms dripped with blood, and its psychic crown pulsed with energy that made reality itself seem to warp around it. When it saw Kara approaching, the creature didn't shriek or posture. It smiled, or at least, so the arrangement of its facial chitin suggested something like satisfaction. Kara landed 30 meters away, her fists raised in a combat stance. "I don't know if you can understand me," she said, "but this ends now. No more killing, no more consuming this world. You're going to leave, or I'm going to make you leave." The Swarmlord cocked its head, studying her with an intelligence that was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Then it did something Kara had never expected from a supposedly mindless alien horror. It spoke. Not with vocal cords, its mouth didn't move, but directly into her mind, the psychic communication feeling like ice water being poured through her consciousness. "Supergirl," the thought voice resonated, pulling her name from her own surface thoughts. "Daughter of Krypton, anomaly, impossibility. The Hive has tasted your essence, and we have analyzed your cellular structure. We have catalogued your weaknesses." "You're welcome to try," Kara replied, forcing her voice to stay steady despite the violation of having something alien inside her mind. "Try." The Swarmlord's psychic presence radiated amusement. "We already have." The creature raised one blade arm and drove it into the ground. The rockcrete shattered, and from the fissure crawled something that made Kara's stomach turn. It was roughly humanoid in shape, but its carapace had the same reflective quality as her own skin. Its eyes glowed with eerie blue light, and when it moved with a speed that would have seemed impossible for something made of chitin and sinew. A bioengineered counter unit, built specifically to fight her. The Swarmlord's psychic voice echoed with triumph. "The Hive adapts. The Hive consumes. The Hive evolves. You have given us the template for perfection, little goddess, and now we shall show you what your power looks like when wielded by superior intelligence." The bioform lunged, and Kara barely managed to dodge. Its fist cratered the rockcrete where she'd been standing, the impact force equivalent to her own strikes. This thing was strong. Maybe not as strong as her at full power, but with her diminished solar absorption, the fight was going to be a lot closer than she wanted. The bioform moved like a nightmare version of herself, all her speed and strength filtered through an alien intelligence that had no concept of restraint or mercy. It came at her in a rushing blur, its chitinous fist driving toward her face with enough force to pulverize reinforced ceramite. Kara deflected the blow, feeling the shock of impact travel up her arm, and countered with a straight punch to its center mass. Her fist connected, and the bioform absorbed the impact. Its carapace rippled like water, distributing the kinetic energy across its entire body structure. It skidded backward 3 meters, leaving gouges in the rockcrete, but recovered instantly and launched itself at her again. Kinetic dispersion adaptation, Kara's tactical mind catalogued. So it's not just mimicking my strength, it's evolved countermeasures against blunt force trauma. She took to the air, trying to gain altitude advantage, but the bioform's legs bunched and it jumped. Not flight. The Tyranids apparently hadn't cracked that particular aspect of her physiology yet, but a leap that carried it 15 meters straight up with enough velocity to intercept her trajectory. They collided midair in a tangle of limbs. The bioform's talons raked across her costume, and Kara felt the fabric tear, the first time anything in this universe had managed to damage the Kryptonian microweave. The creature's strength was formidable, its grip like a vice as it tried to drag her back down to the ground. Kara twisted, broke the grapple, and unleashed her heat vision at point-blank range. And twin beams of concentrated thermal energy carved into the bioform's torso, and for a moment she thought she'd found a weakness. But the creature's carapace was already shifting, the biomineral structure rearranging itself to reflect and dissipate the heat. Not perfectly. She could see charred tissue beneath the armor, but enough to prevent critical damage. They hit the ground together, the impact creating a crater that swallowed 3 abandoned ground cars. Kara rolled to her feet and immediately had to duck under a blade strike from the Swarmlord itself. The massive creature had joined the fight, its 4 sword arms moving in a coordinated pattern that spoke of centuries of combat experience distilled into alien muscle memory. 2 against 1? Kara panted, dodging another strike. Now, that's not very sporting. Sport is a concept for inferior species. The Swarmlord's psychic voice resonated. The Hive seeks only efficiency. Your termination serves the swarm's evolution. Your biomass will be consumed. Your genetic template will be improved upon. The bioform attacked from her blind side, forcing Kara into a defensive position between 2 opponents who showed perfect tactical coordination. Every time she focused on one, the other exploited the opening. The Swarmlord fought with the precision of a master duelist, each strike calculated to force her into positions where the bioform could land devastating blows. And it was working. Kara felt herself being pushed back, her movements becoming reactive rather than proactive. Her powers were still operating at reduced capacity, maybe 75% of her Earth-normal strength, and the sustained combat was draining her solar reserves faster than the weak local sun could replenish them. A blade caught her across the ribs, and Kara felt actual pain. Not much. The Swarmlord's bone sword hadn't penetrated her skin, but enough to shock her. She hadn't felt pain from a physical attack in years, not since red kryptonite exposure back on Earth. The bioform pressed its advantage, raining down blows that Kara had to block rather than simply ignore. Each impact sent shockwaves through her arms, and she realized with growing alarm that this thing was getting stronger, learning from every exchange, adapting its strike patterns based on what worked and what didn't. It's using me as a training partner, she thought with grim realization. And every second I fight it, it gets better at killing me. She needed to change tactics. Pure strength wasn't working. The Tyranids had evolved counters for that. Heat vision was only partially effective. Freeze breath might work, but she'd need an opening to use it, and they weren't giving her one. Then her super hearing caught something that made her heart sink. Interrogator Maxis's voice on the Vox network, coordinating with someone in orbit. Confirmed visual on the Swarmlord. Target is engaged with the xenos entity. Both targets are stationary in Plaza Dominus. Recommend immediate lance strike, full yield. Acceptable losses. Entire Plaza district, approximately 40,000 civilian casualties. No, Kara breathed. They were going to kill everyone in this area, including her, the Swarmlord, and 40,000 people, just to eliminate 2 threats at once. She couldn't let that happen. couldn't let these people be sacrificed like pieces on a chessboard, but she also couldn't break away from this fight without the Swarmlord cutting down hundreds more before she could stop it. Acceptable sacrifice, Maxis had said. That is the calculus of survival in the 41st millennium. Kara made her decision in a microsecond. She stopped defending and went on the offensive, not against her opponents, but against the battlefield itself. Her heat vision swept across the ground in a wide arc, superheating the rockcrete until it became molten. The Swarmlord and Bioform stumbled as the ground liquefied beneath them, their footing suddenly unstable. Then Kara grabbed the Bioform in a bear hug and flew. Straight up, and accelerating as hard as her diminished powers would allow. The creature thrashed in her grip, its talons shredding her cape and drawing shallow cuts across her back, but she held on grimly. The Swarmlord's psychic shriek of rage followed them into the sky, but Kara ignored it. She needed altitude, needed to get this thing away from civilians before the orbital lance strike hit like the wrath of an angry god. A beam of coherent energy, wider than a city block, screamed down from orbit, connecting the ground to the heavens in a pillar of annihilation. The temperature in Plaza Dominus exceeded the surface of a star for 3 full seconds. Everything within the impact zone, buildings, vehicles, Tyranid bioforms, and the Swarmlord itself, was vaporized instantly. Kara felt the shockwave even at 2,000 meters altitude, and the thermal bloom singed her hair and flash-boiled the moisture in the air around her. She watched in numb horror as an entire district of the Hive City simply ceased to exist, replaced by a crater of molten glass that glowed like a miniature sun. "They actually did it," she whispered. "They killed everyone, all those people." The bioform in her arms went berserk, as if sensing its creator's destruction. Its strength surged, and Kara felt her grip slipping. The creature's talons found purchase in her shoulders, and it pulled, trying to rip her arms from their sockets with Kryptonian-level strength. Kara gritted her teeth against the pain and flew higher. The air grew thinner, colder. The bioform's movements became sluggish, not designed for high-altitude combat, apparently. Its carapace began to crack as atmospheric pressure differentials stressed the biological material. At 15,000 meters, she stopped and held the struggling creature at arm's length. It had stopped trying to claw at her and was now simply trying to breathe, its respiratory system failing in the thin air. Through her X-ray vision, Kara could see its internal organs shutting down, the complex biomachinery that gave it strength beginning to fail. She could kill it. Just fly a little higher, let the vacuum and cold finish what the altitude had started. It was a weapon, a tool of genocide created specifically to destroy her. It didn't even have true sentence, just programmed responses designed to mimic her abilities and eliminate her as a threat. But it was still alive, still struggling, still fighting to survive with the same desperate intensity as any living thing facing oblivion. "I'm sorry," Kara said quietly, and meant it. This thing hadn't chosen to exist, hadn't asked to be engineered as a weapon. It was as much a victim of the Hive Mind as anyone else. She descended rapidly, building up speed until she was moving faster than terminal velocity. At 2,000 meters, she rotated and hurled the bioform straight down with every ounce of her remaining strength. The creature became a meteor, a streak of chitin and flesh that hit the ground outside the Hive City with enough force to create a new crater. Kara's X-ray vision confirmed the kill. The bioform had broken apart on impact, its body scattered across 50 meters of wasteland. It hadn't suffered. The death had been instantaneous. She floated in the ash-choked air, breathing hard, trying to process what had just happened. The Swarmlord was dead, the bioform was dead, and 40,000 Imperial citizens were dead, killed by their own government's orbital bombardment. "This universe is insane," she said to no one in particular. Her super hearing picked up Vox chatter from across the city. "Lance strike successful. Swarmlord confirmed eliminated. Xenos entity survived and is displaying aerial superiority. Recommend additional lance strikes if entity approaches population centers. They were already planning to kill her, to drop orbital fire on her head the moment she went anywhere near civilians, and based on what she'd just witnessed, they'd happily sacrifice another 40,000 people to make it happen. Kara looked down at the smoldering crater where Plaza Dominus used to be. Looked at the Hive City spreading out around it, millions of people packed into rock-crete warrens, all of them living under the constant threat of annihilation from enemies without and authorities within. Looked at the Tyranid swarm still visible on the horizon, diminished but not destroyed, already adapting to the loss of their primary synapse creature. And she realized, with a sinking feeling of dread, that she had no idea how to be a hero in this place. On Earth, the rules were clear. Save people. Stop the bad guys. Minimize collateral damage. Trust that the authorities would back you up, or at least not actively try to kill you for helping. Here, saving one group meant condemning another. Fighting the monsters gave them information to use against you. And the authorities viewed her as just another threat to be eliminated with maximum prejudice. A new voice crackled over the Vox networks, this one carrying authority that made even Interrogator Maxis fall silent. This is Inquisitor Lord Vanesh Kroll of the Ordo Xenos. I am assuming command of all Imperial forces in the Vardas system. The entity designated Supergirl is hereby classified as threat level extremists. All units are authorized to engage on site with lethal force. Fleet assets are to maintain orbital bombardment readiness at all times. The voice paused, and Kara could almost feel the weight of the Inquisitor's attention focusing on her from orbit. To the entity known as Supergirl, you have demonstrated capabilities beyond acceptable parameters. You have refused to submit to Imperial authority. You have interfered with sanctioned military operations. By the authority vested in me by the Golden Throne, I declare you excommunicate traitoris. Surrender immediately or face Exterminatus level response. Kara's Kryptonian education helpfully provided a translation. Excommunicate traitoris meant she was now officially an enemy of humanity. And Exterminatus meant they would destroy the entire planet to eliminate her. You can't be serious, she said aloud, knowing no one could hear her. I'm trying to help. But even as she said it, she could see the tactical logic. From the Imperium's perspective, she was an unknown variable with godlike powers who refused to follow orders. The fact that she'd just survived an orbital lance strike probably only confirmed their worst fears. In their minds, she was exactly the kind of threat that justified burning worlds. Her enhanced vision caught movement in the wreckage of Plaza Dominus. Something was moving down there, crawling through the molten glass. Something massive, with a psychic presence that made her head throb even at this distance. The Swarmlord hadn't died. It had survived the orbital strike. Kara watched in numb disbelief as the creature pulled itself from the crater, its body charred and broken, but already regenerating. Flesh knitted back together with horrifying speed. New carapace grew over burnt tissue. Within 30 seconds, the Swarmlord stood at full height again, its 4 blade arms raised in what could only be interpreted as a gesture of triumph. You cannot kill what is already beyond death, its psychic voice boomed across the battlefield. The Hive is eternal. The Hive endures. And now, thanks to your orbital fire, the Hive has learned to survive even your mightiest weapons. The creature's crown pulsed, and Kara felt the psychic call rippling out across the planet. The swarm responded with renewed vigor, fresh waves of bioforms emerging from reclamation pools, where they'd been digesting the dead and reforming into new, deadlier variants. And somewhere in orbit, Inquisitor Lord Kroll was probably preparing another lance strike. Or maybe something worse. Maybe the Exterminatus he'd threatened, whatever that meant, was already being authorized. Kara Zor-El, the Last Daughter of Krypton, floated in the toxic air of an alien world, and faced a truth she'd never confronted on Earth. Sometimes there were no good choices. Sometimes every option led to death and destruction. Sometimes, being a hero meant choosing which tragedy you could live with. The Swarmlord was adapting, the Imperium was preparing to kill her, and millions of people were caught between two forces that neither knew nor cared about mercy. She needed to make a choice. Fight the Tyranids and risk giving them more data to evolve with. Submit to the Imperium and potentially be dissected or destroyed as a xenos threat. Or flee, abandon this world to its fate, and find somewhere else in this vast, hostile galaxy to... No, not that. Never that. Whatever else this universe had taken from her, her home, her family, her understanding of right and wrong, it hadn't taken away her core principle. She didn't run. She didn't abandon people. She found a way to save them even when it seemed impossible, especially when it seemed impossible. And Kara took a deep breath of the ash-filled air, felt the weak stellar radiation trying to replenish her depleted solar reserves, and made her decision. "All right," she said quietly. "If this universe wants to teach me that hope is impossible, then I'm going to teach it right back, one saved life at a time." She descended toward the Swarmlord, her fists clenched and her eyes blazing with determination. Time to show the 41st millennium what a Kryptonian could really do. Kara hit the Swarmlord at Mach 2, her shoulder driving into its regenerated torso with enough force to send both of them crashing through the skeletal remains of 3 buildings. The creature adapted mid-flight, its blade arms finding purchase on her shoulders and using the momentum to flip them both, slamming Kara into the rockcrete hard enough to create a spiderweb of cracks that spread for 50 meters. The impact drove the air from her lungs. Not painful, but noticeable. Another reminder that her powers were still operating below full capacity. She grabbed 2 of the Swarmlord's blade arms and pulled, trying to tear them from their sockets, but the creature's musculature proved more resilient than expected. Instead of ripping free, the limbs stretched like biological cables, absorbing the tension. Impressive strength, and the Swarmlord's psychic voice resonated with what might have been approval. But strength alone is insufficient. The Hive has faced greater warriors, consumed greater champions. You are merely novel. "I'm a lot more than novel," Kara growled, releasing the blade arms and driving her knee into the Swarmlord's thorax. The impact crunched through layers of chitin, and she felt something give way inside the creature's body. Blue ichor sprayed from the wound, hissing where it touched her skin. The Swarmlord didn't even flinch. It simply drove its 2 free blade arms down toward her head in a coordinated strike that would have split a space marine in full Terminator plate like kindling. Kara caught both blades between her palms, feeling the bioelectric energy crackling against her skin, and pushed back. For 3 seconds, they remained locked in a test of pure strength. Kryptonian musculature powered by solar radiation versus Tyranid bioengineering refined across millennia of galactic consumption. The ground beneath them cracked further, unable to withstand the pressure of 2 beings operating at forces that violated physics. Then Kara's heat vision flared, twin beams punching directly into the Swarmlord's face at point-blank range. The creature's head snapped back, its psychic crown shattering under the thermal assault. For the first time, she heard it make an actual sound, a shriek that was part pain, part rage, part something else that made her Kryptonian hearing receptors ache. She used the opening to break the grapple and put distance between them, flying backward 20 meters. The Swarmlord staggered, its movement suddenly uncoordinated, and the loss of its psychic crown apparently disrupting its connection to the Hive Mind. Kara allowed herself a moment of hope. Maybe. The creature's body pulsed, and from its shattered crown emerged new growth, not chitin this time, but something that looked almost crystalline. The psychic pressure returned with doubled intensity, and Kara felt it slam into her mind like a battering ram. You destroyed my primary synapse structure." The Swarmlord's voice was different now, colder, more analytical, forcing rapid evolution of secondary consciousness nodes. "The Hive Mind thanks you for this improvement." "You've got to be kidding me," Kara muttered. She'd just made it stronger by damaging it. The Swarmlord's body was already shifting, adapting. Its carapace developed the same reflective quality the bioform had possessed, designed to deflect her heat vision. Its musculature restructured itself, becoming denser, more compact. Even its combat stance changed, lower, more balanced, compensating for what it had learned about her fighting style. And behind it, emerging from the still smoldering crater of Plaza Dominus, more bioforms crawled into existence. These weren't the standard Tyranid variants she'd been fighting. These were new, custom-designed organisms that incorporated elements of her observed capabilities. Some had developed partially reflective hides. Others moved with enhanced speed, their legs bioengineered for rapid acceleration. A few even had organ clusters in their torsos that glowed with stored bioelectric energy, primitive attempts to replicate her heat vision. "How fast are you evolving?" Kara asked, genuine concern creeping into her voice. "Not as fast as necessary," the Swarmlord replied. "The Hive consumes millions of species across thousands of worlds. Your Kryptonian biology is remarkable, but not unique in its fundamentals. Solar-powered cellular structures have been encountered before. Energy projection through ocular apparatus exists in 17 catalogued species. Atmospheric flight via gravitic manipulation has been analyzed and partially replicated." It raised one blade arm and pointed at her, the gesture somehow conveying absolute certainty. "You're not special, Supergirl. You are simply unprocessed." The swarm attacked as a coordinated unit. The new bioforms moved with disturbing synchronization, their attack patterns overlapping in ways that forced Kara into purely defensive maneuvers. She dodged, blocked, and countered, but for every organism she destroyed, so 2 more adapted to the killing method and avoided it. She froze a cluster of them with her freeze breath, watching them shatter into crystalline fragments. The remaining bioforms immediately began developing thermal regulation systems, their bodies generating internal heat to counter freezing attacks. She used her super speed to create a whirlwind, hurling organisms into walls and each other. The swarm adapted by developing stronger grip limbs and lower centers of gravity. She tried heat vision again, carving through a dozen attackers. The next wave had evolved multi-layered carapaces with ablative outer shells designed to burn away and protect inner tissue. It was like fighting an enemy that learned from every mistake instantly and never made the same error twice. And the Swarmlord orchestrated it all, its psychic presence coordinating the swarm's evolution in real time based on her responses. Kara was fighting a war of attrition she couldn't win. Every second she stayed engaged, every tactic she revealed made the Tyranids better equipped to kill her. And eventually, maybe in an hour, maybe in a day, they would adapt completely. Would create organisms that could match her strength, her speed, her durability. Would turn her own capabilities against her. Her super hearing caught new Vox chatter. Inquisitor Lord Kroll has authorized cyclonic torpedoes. Estimated time to bombardment, 17 minutes. All Imperial forces are to evacuate to designated extraction points immediately. Vardis Prime is condemned. Cyclonic torpedoes. She didn't know exactly what those were, but the panicked tone of the Vox operators and the word condemned painted a pretty clear picture. Some kind of planet-killing weapon, Exterminatus, the total annihilation of the world to deny it to the enemy. 17 minutes. That's how long this planet had left before the Imperium burned it to ash, rather than let the Tyranids have it. "No," Kara said aloud, dodging a Swarmlord blade strike that carved a 10-meter trench in the ground. "No, I'm not letting that happen." "You have no choice," the Swarmlord replied. its psychic voice carrying absolute certainty. This world is ours to consume or theirs to destroy. You cannot save it. You can only choose which extinction you prefer. There's always another choice, Kara shot back, driving her fist through a bioform's torso and using the corpse as a bludgeon against 3 others. Now there's always another way. But even as she said it, she couldn't see it. The math was brutal and simple. 17 minutes to evacuate millions of people. Impossible. Even at supersonic speed, flying people to safety 1 or 2 at a time, she couldn't save more than a few thousand before the bombardment hit. Unless... An idea sparked in her mind. Reckless, dangerous, probably insane by any rational metric. But it was the only option that didn't end with either total planetary death or Tyranid victory. She needed to buy time, needed to force the Imperium to delay their Exterminatus order long enough for her to attempt the impossible. And there was only one way to do that. Kara stopped fighting the swarm and flew straight up, accelerating hard. The bioforms couldn't follow. They'd evolved for ground combat, not high-altitude pursuit. From the Swarmlord's psychic shriek of frustration followed her, but she ignored it. At 15,000 meters, she stopped and used her telescopic vision to scan the sky. There, in high orbit, a massive vessel bristling with weapons and armored plating. Gothic architecture mixed with functionality, cathedral spires emerging from warship hulls. An Imperial Navy cruiser, if her pattern recognition was accurate. That's where Inquisitor Lord Kroll would be. That's where the Exterminatus order had originated. Kara took a deep breath, steeling herself for what came next, and flew toward orbit. The atmospheric friction created a plasma sheath around her body as she accelerated through the mesosphere, the heat harmless to her Kryptonian physiology but spectacular to observe. She probably looked like a meteor in reverse, a golden comet ascending toward the stars. The Vox networks exploded with alarm. Xenos entity has achieved orbital velocity. It's heading directly for the righteous condemnation. All weapon batteries, open fire. Las cannons and macro batteries unleashed their fury, filling the space around her with explosive shells and energy beams. Kara wove between them, her enhanced reflexes and speed making her impossible to hit with conventional targeting systems. A few shots clipped her, one macro shell exploding against her shoulder hard enough to slow her momentum, but nothing that could stop her. She reached the cruiser's hull and grabbed onto a cathedral spire, her fingers denting the adamantium plating. Through the metal, she could hear the panicked voices inside, crew members shouting, and alarms blaring, someone screaming about a hull breach. "Inquisitor Kroll," she shouted, knowing her voice wouldn't carry through vacuum and metal. She switched to heat vision instead, carving a message directly into the ship's hull in letters 3 meters tall. "Talk to me." 60 seconds passed. Then a Vox horn activated on the ship's exterior, and a voice that dripped with cold authority addressed her. "You dare assault an inquisitorial vessel? Your audacity exceeds even your heresy, xenos." "I'm not xenos," Kara replied, hoping the Vox pickups could hear her. "I'm human. From another dimension, but still human, and I can save this world if you give me time." "Vardus Prime is lost." Kroll's voice was emotionless. "The Tyranid infestation has reached critical mass. The Swarmlord's survival of orbital bombardment confirms adaptive resistance to conventional strikes. Exterminatus is the only logical response." "What about the people?" Kara demanded. "The millions of civilians still down there?" "Acceptable losses. Better they die by Imperial fire than be consumed by the Hive fleet. At least in death, they deny the great devourer their biomass." Kara felt her hands clenching into fists, the adamantium hull groaning under her grip. "I can evacuate them. Give me time, 6 hours, maybe less, and I can get the civilians off-world before you destroy the planet." There was a long pause. When Kroll spoke again, there was something that might have been curiosity in his tone. "You propose to evacuate 7 million people in 6 hours. Using what transport capacity?" "That the entire Imperial Navy lacks sufficient ships to accomplish such a feat." Using me, Kara said simply. I can fly, I can carry people, I can move fast enough to make multiple trips before... Impossible, Kroll cut her off. Even assuming you could carry 20 people per trip and achieve orbital velocity every 60 seconds, which I do not concede, the mathematics are untenable. You would save perhaps 200,000 at most. The remainder would still require Exterminatus. 200,000 is better than zero, Kara argued. That's 200,000 lives that don't have to end today. 200,000 vectors for Tyranid infection, Kroll countered. Any civilians evacuated would require extensive screening for genestealer infiltration, Tyranid biospores, or psychic contamination. The quarantine procedures alone would take months, during which time those saved individuals could spread corruption to other worlds. Kara wanted to scream, wanted to shake this man and make him see that lives had value beyond tactical calculations. But she forced herself to stay calm, to think like the strategist she'd been trained to be. What if I can stop the Tyranids completely? She asked. What if I can kill the Swarmlord permanently and drive the Hive fleet from this system? Another pause. Longer this time. Elaborate. The Swarmlord is adapting to me because I'm fighting it on the ground, where it can analyze every move and evolve counters. But it's still a biological entity. It still needs to breathe, still needs an atmosphere, still has limits. Kara looked down at Varda's Prime, at the swarms visible even from orbit. What if I take the fight somewhere it can't adapt? Somewhere its evolution speed becomes a liability instead of an advantage? You propose luring it into orbital combat, Kroll said, and she could hear the tactical gears turning in his mind. Remove it from the Hive Mind support structure. Isolate it from atmospheric considerations that constrain engagement parameters. Exactly. Up here, I'm at full strength, no atmospheric drag, no planetary concerns about collateral damage. Just me versus it, in an environment where I have every advantage. Kara tightened her grip on the cathedral spire. Give me 1 hour. If I can't kill it in that time, you can proceed with Exterminatus. But if I succeed, you delay the bombardment and allow coordinated evacuation. The silence stretched for 30 seconds. Kara could almost feel Kroll weighing the tactical value against the risk, calculating probabilities and acceptable losses. 1 hour, he said finally. But understand this, Xenos. If you fail, if the Swarmlord survives your orbital assault, I will launch Exterminatus immediately. No delays, no second chances. Varda's Prime will burn, and you will burn with it. I won't fail, Kara said, releasing the hull and floating backward. I can't afford to. She descended back toward the planet, her mind already racing through combat scenarios. She needed to draw the Swarmlord into orbit, needed to make it chase her into the vacuum where her Kryptonian physiology gave her overwhelming advantage. But how do you bait a creature that claims to have consumed thousands of species? How do you make yourself so threatening that it abandons tactical advantage to pursue? The answer came to her as she broke through the cloud layer, hurt its pride. Make it need to prove superiority? Kara smiled grimly. Time to show the Hive Mind what happened when you challenged the Last Daughter of Krypton. Kara descended through the atmosphere like a falling star, her trajectory aimed directly at the Swarmlord's position. The creature stood in the ruins of what had once been Hive Tertius's commercial district, surrounded by its evolved bioforms. Through her telescopic vision, she could see it coordinating the swarm's spread across the city. Termagants flowing through hab blocks like a living tide, carnifexes systematically demolishing fortified positions, lictors stalking through shadows, hunting survivors. She hit the ground 50 meters from the Swarmlord with enough force to send a shockwave rippling through the surrounding ruins. Dust and debris exploded outward, and when it cleared, she stood in the center of a fresh crater, her cape settling around her shoulders, her eyes blazing with cold determination. You return, and the Swarmlord's psychic voice carried amusement. Did your orbital assault on the Imperial vessel fail? Or have you simply accepted the inevitable that this world belongs to the Hive? I've got a better idea, Kara said, cracking her knuckles with deliberate slowness. You claim the Hive Mind has consumed thousands of species, that you've faced greater warriors than me, that I'm just novel. Correct. You are impressive for an individual organism. But the Hive has devoured entire empires. Your planet, Krypton. The Swarmlord paused, and Kara felt its psychic presence rifle through her surface thoughts, extracting information about her homeworld with the casual ease of someone reading a datapad. Exploded before you could save it. You are a survivor of extinction, alone, diminished, a relic of a dead civilization pretending at relevance. The words hit harder than any physical blow. Kara felt her jaw tighten, felt the familiar ache of loss that never quite went away, but she forced it down, channeled it into cold focus. You're right about one thing, she said quietly. Krypton is gone. Everyone I knew there is dead. I couldn't save them. She rose into the air, her fists clenched. But I'm still here, and I'm a lot harder to kill than you think. Bravado, the Swarmlord dismissed. The Hive has heard such defiance from countless species in their final moments. Your words are meaningless. Your resistance is temporary. You will be consumed. Then prove it, Kara challenged. Stop hiding behind your swarm. Stop sending evolved bioforms to do your fighting. Face me yourself, one-on-one, no backup, no adaptations, just you and me. The Swarmlord's psychic presence shifted, and for the first time, Kara sensed something that might have been genuine interest. The creature cocked its head, studying her with its 4 eyes. You propose single combat. The Hive has no concept of honor. We do not engage in ritualized conflict for abstract principles. I'm not talking about honor, Kara shot back. I'm talking about data. You want to understand me, right? Want to catalog my abilities, my limits, my weaknesses. You can't do that properly when I'm fighting 100 enemies at once. Too many variables, too much chaos. But if it's just you and me... She let the implications hang in the air. The Swarmlord was intelligent enough to see the logic. A controlled environment, a perfect laboratory for studying Kryptonian physiology under combat stress. Intriguing, the creature mused. But the Hive sees your tactical objective. Had you wish to isolate me from the swarm, to remove my support structure, to fight where your individual power is less constrained? Of course I do, Kara admitted. I'm not an idiot. But here's the thing. You claim the Hive Mind has faced greater warriors, consumed greater champions. So prove it. Beat me in a straight fight. No tricks, no overwhelming numbers, just pure superiority. She flew higher, her voice carrying across the ruined city. Unless you're scared, unless all that evolutionary perfection you keep bragging about is worthless without 10,000 organisms backing you up. The psychic pressure that followed was like standing in a hurricane. The Swarmlord's rage, if such an alien intelligence could feel rage, crashed against Kara's mind with enough force to make her vision blur, until every Tyranid organism within 5 kilometers froze simultaneously, their synaptic connections overwhelmed by the intensity of their master's response. You dare, the voice thundered, you dare question the supremacy of the Hive? We who have crossed galaxies, we who have consumed civilizations older than your species. Then show me, Kara pressed, pushing every ounce of contempt into her voice. Stop talking, stop posturing. Show me this legendary Hive Mind superiority, or admit that you need your swarm, because without them, you're just another overgrown bug I can step on. The Swarmlord moved faster than Kara had seen it move before, closing the distance between them in a blur of chitin and blade arms. But it didn't attack. Instead, it simply stood there, all 4 arms spread wide, its psychic crown pulsing with barely contained intensity. Very well, it said, and the words dripped with cold certainty. You wish for single combat? The Hive will grant your wish, but not here, not where you can retreat to Imperial lines when you begin to lose, not where interference is possible. The creature pointed one blade arm skyward. There, in the void, where nothing exists but vacuum and starlight, where there is no ground to retreat to, no atmosphere to carry your voice, no witnesses but the uncaring cosmos. Kara's heart rate accelerated. This was it, the opening she needed. Agreed. You and me. Orbital combat. No backup on either side. The swarm will pause its consumption during our engagement, the Swarmlord stated. This is not mercy, it is efficiency. If you survive longer than anticipated, the Hive Mind wishes to observe your final moments without distraction. Your defeat will provide valuable data for future encounters with Kryptonian-class organisms. And when I win? Kara asked. The Swarmlord's psychic presence radiated something that might have been amusement. You will not win, but if, impossibly, you achieve victory, the swarm will withdraw from this system. Temporarily, long enough for your Imperial associates to evacuate the biomass they value. Kara blinked. That was more than she'd expected, more than she'd hoped for. You'd really withdraw? Just because I beat you? The Hive Mind is eternal, the Swarmlord explained. This single organism's destruction is irrelevant to the greater whole. But the data gained from witnessing your absolute limits, the point where Kryptonian biology fails, is invaluable. If you somehow prevail, the knowledge of how you achieved it is worth more than this single world's biomass. It was a trap. Kara knew it was a trap. The Swarmlord was too intelligent, too calculating to make such an offer without hidden conditions. But it was also an opportunity, maybe the only one she'd get, to save millions of lives. Fine, she said. Let's do this. The Swarmlord's body began to change. Its carapace thickened, developing layers of bio-armor specifically designed for vacuum operations. Respiratory vents sealed themselves. Internal organs restructured for zero-atmosphere combat. The creature was adapting in real time, preparing its biology for an environment where most carbon-based life would die in seconds. Follow, it commanded, and launched itself skyward with a leap that carried it hundreds of meters straight up. At the apex of the jump, its body underwent another transformation, biothrusters erupting from its back, venting pressurized gases that propelled it higher. It was creating its own crude form of rocket propulsion, using internal chemical reactions. Kara followed, flying beside the ascending creature as they rose through the cloud layer, through the stratosphere, into the thin upper atmosphere where the sky turned from ash gray to deep purple to the infinite black of space. Her super hearing caught Vox chatter from the Imperial cruiser. Swarmlord and Xenos entity are both achieving orbital velocity. Inquisitor, your orders? Hold bombardment, Kroll's voice responded. I wish to observe this engagement. If the Xenos entity fails, the cyclonic torpedoes will be ready. If she succeeds. There was a pause. Then we will have witnessed something unprecedented. Neither outcome provides valuable intelligence. They broke through the final wisps of atmosphere into the true vacuum of space. Kara felt the familiar sensation of solar radiation washing over her, unfiltered by planetary atmosphere. Pure, concentrated stellar energy that her Kryptonian cells drank in like water after a drought. Her powers surged, strength flooding back into her musculature, her senses sharpening to levels she hadn't experienced since arriving in this universe. She was back at 100%, maybe even beyond, as her body overcame the dimensional acclimation issues and adapted to this reality's physical laws. The Swarmlord hung in space across from her, silhouetted against Vardus Prime's curve. Its biothrusters had gone dormant, conserved for maneuvering. Without atmosphere to carry its psychic voice, not it communicated through pure mental projection. Here we are. No ground, no air, no escape. Only you, me, and the question of which organism is superior. Kara looked down at the planet below, at the millions of people whose lives hung in the balance, at the Tyranid swarm that had indeed paused its consumption, at the Imperial forces watching from their fortified positions. Then she looked at the Swarmlord, at this apex predator of a galaxy-consuming hive mind that thought evolution was the answer to every problem. "I've got a question for you," she said, her voice carried by radio frequencies that the Swarmlord's evolved organs could detect. "Your hive mind has consumed thousands of species, right? Catalogued millions of different biological adaptations, correct? Now then answer me this. Has it ever encountered hope?" The Swarmlord's psychic presence conveyed confusion. "Hope is an abstract emotional state, irrelevant to combat efficiency." "Wrong," Kara said, and her eyes began to glow brighter as she channeled solar energy through her heat vision organs. "Hope is what keeps you fighting when the numbers say you should lose. Hope is what makes the impossible possible. And hope—" She accelerated, moving at speeds she hadn't dared use in atmosphere for fear of collateral damage. The sonic boom of her passage would have shattered windows for kilometers if there had been air to carry it. Instead, there was only the silent fury of Kryptonian power unleashed at maximum capacity. Is exactly what your hive mind can't evolve a counter for. She hit the Swarmlord like a meteor striking a planet. So then the real battle began. The impact sent them both tumbling through the vacuum, locked in a deadly embrace. Kara's fist connected with the Swarmlord's thorax in a rapid series of strikes that would have pulverized a battle tank. Each blow created shockwaves of kinetic energy that rippled through the creature's carapace, cracks spiderwebbing across its armored surface. But the Swarmlord adapted even as she struck. Its bio-armor restructured itself, developing shock absorption layers beneath the outer shell. Internal fluids redirected to cushion impacts. Muscle density increased by 20% in the span of 3 seconds. Predictable, the Swarmlord's psychic voice resonated even in vacuum. Brute force remains your primary tactic. The Hive has catalogued this approach. The creature's 4 blade arms came alive, moving in patterns too complex for random chance. This was engineered precision, the product of consuming countless warrior races and distilling their combat techniques into optimal strike sequences. One blade found the gap in Kara's defenses and carved across her ribs. Another slammed into her jaw with enough force to snap her head sideways. The blows actually hurt. Not severely, her invulnerability held against the bioweapons, but enough to shock her. The Swarmlord had somehow increased its striking power, the blades now wreathed in bioelectric energy that enhanced their penetrating capability. Kara grabbed 2 of the blade arms and pulled, using her leverage in zero gravity to spin them both. The Swarmlord tried to counter, but momentum in vacuum was absolute. Once established, it couldn't be easily changed without something to push against. They became a tumbling binary system, rotating around their shared center of mass. She released at the optimal moment, sending the Swarmlord hurtling toward Vardis Prime's upper atmosphere. The creature tried to arrest its momentum with biothrusters, but Kara was already moving, intercepting its trajectory and driving her shoulder into its midsection. They plunged together toward the planet, gravity beginning to assert itself as they entered the thermosphere. "Tactical error," the Swarmlord communicated. "You return us to atmosphere where my swarm can provide support." "Who said anything about landing?" Kara replied, and grabbed the creature by 2 of its limbs. She began to spin, using the Swarmlord's multi-ton mass as a counterweight onto building angular momentum in the thin upper atmosphere. Faster and faster, until they were rotating dozens of times per second, the G-forces that would have liquefied a human body barely registering to her Kryptonian physiology. The Swarmlord's carapace began to show stress fractures from the centrifugal force. Its bio-thrusters fired erratically, trying to stabilize, but only made the spin worse. Then Kara released. The Swarmlord shot away from her like a bullet, streaking back up through the atmosphere and into space at such velocity that it couldn't possibly arrest its momentum in time. Kara watched through telescopic vision as the creature tumbled past the orbit of Vardis Prime's smaller moon, its bio-thrusters firing desperately to regain control. She didn't give it the chance. Kara accelerated to pursuit speed, crossing the distance in seconds. She caught up to the Swarmlord just as it managed to stabilize itself and drove both fists into its psychic crown with every ounce of strength she possessed. The crown shattered, crystalline fragments spinning away into the void. The Swarmlord's psychic scream was like a star going supernova inside her mind, pure agony transmitted across dimensions. Kara gritted her teeth against the mental assault, feeling blood trickle from her nose as the psychic backlash overwhelmed even her alien physiology's defenses. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. She unleashed her heat vision at point-blank range, twin beams of concentrated thermal energy that burned hotter than the surface of most stars. The Swarmlord's adaptive carapace tried to reflect the energy, tried to dissipate it, and tried to evolve in real time to counter the assault. It wasn't fast enough. The heat vision punched through armor, through muscle, through internal organs that had been engineered for maximum efficiency. Blue ichor boiled in vacuum, flash freezing into crystalline fragments. The Swarmlord thrashed, its blade arms carving wild patterns as it tried to escape the thermal assault. Kara poured everything into the attack, all her rage at being stranded in this nightmare universe, all her frustration at the Imperium's callous disregard for life, all her determination to prove that hope wasn't just an abstract emotional state, but a force that could change reality itself. The Swarmlord's torso began to split open, the thermal stress causing catastrophic structural failure. For a moment, Kara thought she'd won, thought the apex predator of the Hive Mind was finished. Then the creature's body exploded, not from damage, from deliberate self-destruction. The Swarmlord had detonated its own biomass in a spray of acid, bone fragments, and compressed biotoxins. The cloud enveloped Kara before she could react, the acidic compounds eating through her costume and searing her skin. The bone shrapnel struck with the force of armor-piercing rounds, each fragment carrying enough kinetic energy to crack ceramite. Kara tumbled through the debris cloud, her vision blurred by the acid, her exposed skin burning with actual chemical damage. Through the pain, she saw what the Swarmlord had accomplished with its sacrifice, buying time to regenerate. The creature's scattered biomass was already coalescing, individual pieces crawling through vacuum toward each other like magnetized metal. The Hive Mind was reconstructing its champion from the molecular level, using every fragment as a seed for regrowth. Insufficient, the Swarmlord's psychic voice echoed from the reforming mass. Your thermal attack was impressive. Your physical strength is formidable, but the Hive endures beyond individual mortality. We are legion. We are eternal. Kara wiped acid from her eyes, feeling her Kryptonian healing factor already repairing the damage. The burns were fading, skin knitting back together at accelerated rates. But she could see the tactical problem. The Swarmlord could regenerate faster than she could destroy it. As long as even a fragment remained, the Hive Mind could rebuild its champion. She needed a different approach. Something that didn't just damage the creature, but eliminated it so completely that regeneration became impossible. Her gaze drifted to Vardis Prime's sun, a G-class star not unlike Earth's own soul, pumping out steady streams of life-giving radiation. The same radiation that powered her abilities, the same radiation that, if concentrated properly, could burn hot enough to vaporize biological matter at the atomic level. An idea formed, insane, reckless, probably suicidal even by Kryptonian standards. But it might work. The Swarmlord's regeneration was nearly complete, its body reforming into its full 7-meter height. The new carapace was even thicker than before, incorporating lessons learned from her thermal attack. Its psychic crown had been replaced with something that looked more organic, more distributed, harder to destroy with a single strike. "Round 2, it announced. "The Hive has adapted. Your previous tactics will prove ineffective." "Good thing I'm not using previous tactics," Kara said, and flew directly away from the creature, not toward Vardis Prime, but toward the system's sun. The Swarmlord's psychic presence conveyed surprise, then understanding. Retreat? The Hive expected more resistance from... "Not retreating," Kara called back over her shoulder. "Reloading." She accelerated to maximum velocity, her body becoming a golden streak against the star field. Behind her, she could feel the Swarmlord's biothrusters igniting as it gave chase. Perfect. She needed it to follow. The sun grew larger in her vision as she closed the distance. Even at millions of kilometers out, she could feel the radiation intensity increasing, and her cells drinking in the energy like they were dying of thirst. Her strength surged beyond anything she'd experienced since arriving in this universe, beyond even her normal Earth-standard capacity. The solar radiation here was purer somehow, less filtered by stellar phenomena. Or maybe it was just that her body had finally completed its dimensional acclimation and could now process stellar energy at maximum efficiency. Either way, she was charging up like a living battery, and the Swarmlord was following her directly into the power source. At 1 million kilometers from the sun's surface, the radiation levels would have killed an unprotected human instantly. Kara felt like she was swimming in pure energy, every cell in her body vibrating with barely contained power. Her skin glowed with absorbed radiation, her eyes blazing so bright they looked like miniature stars. The Swarmlord was struggling. Even with its adapted carapace and evolved biosystems, exposure to raw stellar radiation at this intensity was pushing Tyranid biology to its absolute limits. Its movements were slower, more labored. Its psychic presence dimmed as the radiation interfered with synaptic connections. "Clever," it admitted. "You lure me into an environment that enhances your capabilities while degrading mine." The Hive concedes the tactical superiority of this maneuver. "I'm just getting started," Kara said, and turned to face the creature. Her body was saturated with solar energy, more than she'd ever contained before. Enough to level a city if released all at once. Enough to create a miniature supernova in the void of space. Was enough to ensure that not even a single cell of the Swarmlord survived. "You wanted to see my absolute limits," she said, her voice carrying across radio frequencies even as her body began to shine like a second sun. "You wanted data on Kryptonian biology under extreme stress. Well, congratulations. You're about to get exactly what you asked for." The Swarmlord seemed to realize what she was planning. Its biothrusters flared to life, trying to retreat, but it was already too close. Already caught in the gravitational well of both the sun and Kara's impending energy discharge. "You cannot control that much energy." The creature's psychic voice carried genuine alarm for the first time. "The release will destroy you as surely as it destroys me." "Maybe," Kara admitted, and feeling the energy building to critical levels inside her cellular structure. "But here's the thing about hope, Swarmlord. It's not about knowing you'll survive. It's about believing some things are worth dying for." She released the energy all at once. The explosion of light could be seen from Vardis Prime as a second sun briefly igniting in space. Every instrument on the Imperial cruiser maxed out simultaneously. The Tyranid swarm on the planet's surface recoiled as their synaptic connection to the Swarmlord was violently severed. And in the center of the blast, Kara Zor-El channeled enough stellar radiation to atomize a small moon, directing every ounce of it at the Swarmlord's position with surgical precision. The creature's adaptive carapace meant nothing. Its regenerative capabilities meant nothing. And its billion-year evolutionary refinements meant nothing against the fundamental power of a star unleashed at point-blank range. The Swarmlord burned. Not just its body, its very molecules were torn apart and scattered across space, too dispersed to ever reform, too thoroughly destroyed for the Hive Mind to rebuild. When the light faded, Kara floated alone in the void, her body smoking from the energy discharge, her costume in tatters, but alive. Impossibly, miraculously alive. And the Swarmlord was gone. Completely, finally, permanently. She'd won. Kara floated in the vacuum, her body trembling from the sheer magnitude of energy she'd just released. Every cell felt scorched, drained to the point of near collapse. Her vision swam, stars blurring into streaks of light. The solar radiation that had felt like life-giving water minutes ago now seemed distant, her depleted cells struggling to absorb and process it at their usual efficiency. She'd pushed herself further than ever before, further than fighting Darkseid, further than stopping the world killers, further than any battle on Earth had ever demanded. And it had worked. The Swarmlord was truly dead, atomized beyond any possibility of regeneration. But the cost, warning signals from her own biology, told her she needed time to recover. Hours, maybe days of solar radiation absorption before she'd be back to full capacity. But right now, she was operating at maybe 30% power, her Kryptonian healing factor working overtime to repair cellular damage from the massive energy discharge. Her super hearing, diminished but still functional, caught Vox transmissions from the Imperial cruiser. Confirmed detonation event, energy signature off all known scales. The Swarmlord's psychic presence has ceased completely. Augur arrays showing scattered biomasses across 17,000 cubic kilometers. No regeneration activity detected. The xenos entity is still alive. Repeat, the entity designated Supergirl survived the blast. Then Inquisitor Lord Kroll's voice, carrying a mixture of something that might have been respect and definitely was still suspicion. Impressive, suicidally reckless, but impressive. The Swarmlord is confirmed terminated. However, as this does not absolve you of your heretical nature, Xenos, you have merely proven you are a more dangerous threat than initially assessed. Kara wanted to scream. She'd just killed a galaxy-consuming monster, saved this entire world from Tyranid consumption, and they were still calling her a threat. I kept my end of the bargain, she transmitted back, her voice hoarse even to her own ears. The Swarmlord is dead. The Hive Fleet should withdraw. That was the deal. Deals with Xenos entities carry no Imperial recognition, Kroll replied coldly. However, I'm a man of my word if not Imperial law. You will have your 6 hours to attempt evacuation. But understand, cyclonic torpedoes remain armed and targeted. The moment your time expires, or the moment you prove unable to complete the task, Vardis Prime burns. 6 hours, or to move 7 million people in her current state. Kara looked down at the planet, at the Tyranid swarm that had indeed begun to withdraw. The Swarmlord's final command being honored by the Hive Mind's distributed intelligence. They were pulling back from the cities, retreating toward their bioships in orbit, consuming their own dead to reclaim biomass. Keeping their end of the bargain, at least, which meant the only obstacle to saving these people was her own physical limitations. Understood, she said to Kroll, and began the long descent back to Vardis Prime. Re-entry burned against her depleted shields. Under normal circumstances, atmospheric friction was barely noticeable. Her invulnerability rendered it meaningless. But now, weakened and drained, she actually felt the heat. Not painful, but present. A reminder that she was mortal, even if that mortality was harder to reach than most. She landed in what remained of Hive Tertius's central plaza, her boots touching rockcrete that was still scorched from the earlier lance strike. Around her, Imperial forces emerged from their defensive positions, guardsmen staring with a mixture of awe and terror, Interrogator Maxis approaching with weapon lowered but not holstered. Colonel Vaughn was there too, his weathered face showing the toll of 3 days of continuous combat. He saluted, a crisp, formal gesture that surprised her. "The Swarmlord is dead," he said. It wasn't a question. "The swarm is withdrawing. You actually did it." "Yeah," Kara replied, swaying slightly on her feet. "I did, but we're not done. Inquisitor Kroll is giving me 6 hours to evacuate as many civilians as possible before he fires cyclonic torpedoes. I need your help organizing the evacuation, gathering people at central collection points, prioritizing the young, the sick, anyone who can't survive the bombardment shelters." Vaughn's expression darkened. "You cannot possibly evacuate 7 million people in 6 hours. Even with your abilities, the mathematics are impossible." "I have to try," Kara said simply. "I didn't come this far, didn't fight that hard, just to watch millions die because it's mathematically inconvenient." Maxis stepped forward, their armor still bearing scorch marks from earlier combat. "The Inquisitor is correct to proceed with Exterminatus. This world is compromised. Tyranid biospores have contaminated the water supply, the soil, likely the very air. Anyone who remains will face slow death from genetic corruption. Exterminatus is mercy." "Mercy?" Kara turned on them, exhaustion making her voice sharp. "Burning people alive is mercy. There has to be another way. Quarantine procedures, medical screening, something other than just killing everyone. The Imperium does not have the resources for such measures," Maxis stated flatly. 7 million refugees require ships, supplies, medical facilities, housing. Multiplied across 1,000 similar invasions, the logistical burden would collapse entire sectors. Exterminatus is the only practical solution. Kara felt something break inside her. Not physically, but something deeper. The last fragile hope that this universe could be reasoned with, could be made to see value in individual lives beyond their tactical utility. "Then I'll do it myself," she said. "I'll carry them out one group at a time. So I'll fly them to the Imperial cruiser, to other ships in the system, to anywhere that's safe. And you're going to help me identify who needs evacuation first." "You're in no condition for such efforts," Maxis observed, their augmented eyes analyzing her weakened state. "Your energy reserves are depleted. Your cellular structure shows signs of radiation damage. You'll collapse before evacuating even a fraction of the population." "Then I'll collapse trying," Kara shot back. "Because that's what heroes do. We try, even when the numbers say we should fail. We hope, even when hope seems impossible. We die uselessly," Maxis interrupted, "and accomplish nothing but adding our own corpse to the pyre. That is not heroism, that is stupidity." Before Kara could respond, Vaughn raised his hand. "Interrogator, permission to speak freely." Maxis nodded curtly. "I have served the Emperor for 20 years, Vaughn said carefully. "I have executed heretics, purged xenos, fought traitors and demons. I have watched good men die for the Imperium without hesitation, but in all that time I've never seen anyone fight as hard to save lives as this entity has fought today." He turned to face Kara, his expression unreadable. "She killed the Swarmlord, alone, unaided by Imperial forces. Risked her own annihilation to save a world she has no connection to, no stake in, no reason to protect. If that is not the Emperor's will made manifest, then I have fundamentally misunderstood our purpose." Maxis's weapon twitched. "You tread dangerously close to heresy, Colonel." "Perhaps," Vaughn acknowledged, "but I watched her save my men when she could have fled. Watched her protect civilians when tactical doctrine demanded she abandon them. Watched her face impossible odds without hesitation." He looked Kara in the eyes. "If the Imperium cannot find a way to work with such a being, then maybe we deserve to burn." The silence that followed was broken by a new voice. Young, female, transmitted over Vox from orbit. This is Canoness Helene Severina of the Order of the Valorous Heart. We have been monitoring the engagement from our battle barge in system. Interrogator Maxis, with respect, I must disagree with your assessment. Kara's enhanced vision tracked a new vessel entering Varda's Prime's orbital space, a ship bearing the iconography of armored women wreathed in holy fire. The Adepta Sororitas, space nuns with flamethrowers and unshakable faith if her intercepted vox chatter was accurate. This entity has demonstrated qualities we teach our sisters to embody, Severina continued. Self-sacrifice, protection of the faithful, willingness to face any foe in defense of humanity. Her methods are unorthodox, yes. Her nature remains questionable. But her actions speak to a purity of purpose that deserves consideration. Your sentiment is noted, Canoness, Maxis replied coldly. But it does not change Imperial doctrine regarding... Imperial doctrine also recognizes living saints, Severina cut in. Miraculous manifestations of the Emperor's will that transcend normal understanding. What if this Supergirl is such a manifestation? What if the Emperor himself sent her to test our faith, to see if we would recognize divinity in unfamiliar form? Kara wanted to object. She wasn't divine, wasn't sent by anyone. It was just a Kryptonian who'd gotten lost between dimensions, but she bit her tongue. If these people needed to interpret her as a miracle to help her save lives, she'd accept that misunderstanding. I am dispatching shuttlecraft to assist with evacuation, Severina announced. My sisters will coordinate with Colonel Vaughn's forces to establish collection points and triage protocols. We may not save everyone, but we can save someone, and in the Emperor's eyes, every soul matters. Maxis stood silent for a long moment, then holstered their weapon. Very well. But I'm adding this incident to my report. The Inquisition will make the final determination regarding this entity's nature. Fair enough, Kara said, too exhausted to argue further. She looked at Vaughn. Where do we start? The Colonel activated a hololith display showing Hive Tertius's layout. The eastern sectors sustained minimal damage. Population density approximately 1.2 million. If we focus evacuation efforts there first. No, Kara interrupted, studying the map. The eastern sectors have the best shelter infrastructure. They can survive in bunkers if needed. We focus on the western districts, the ones the Tyranids hit hardest, where civilian casualties are highest and infrastructure is compromised. Vaughn frowned. But the western districts have fewer survivors. The mathematics say we save the people who need saving most, Kara said firmly. Not the ones who are easiest to save. Yeah, and that's the whole point of being a hero. She saw understanding dawn in Vaughn's eyes. Perhaps the first time someone in this universe had actually gotten what she was trying to do. Understood, he said, and began issuing orders over the Vox network. Over the next 6 hours, Kara pushed herself harder than she'd ever pushed before. She flew sortie after sortie, carrying 20 people at a time to the Sororita's battle barge. Each trip took 5 minutes. 2 minutes to load refugees into a makeshift harness she'd fashioned from salvaged cable. 1 minute flight to orbit, 1 minute to unload, 1 minute return journey. 12 trips per hour, 240 people per hour, in 6 hours, operating at the absolute edge of her depleted capabilities. 1,440 people, out of 7 million. The numbers mocked her. For every person she saved, 5,000 remained. For every child she carried to safety, 100 more watched from windows with desperate hope in their eyes. The Sororita's shuttles helped, their crews working with brutal efficiency to pack refugees into every available space. Colonel Vaughn's guardsmen organized civilians into orderly queues, prioritizing the young and infirm just as Kara had demanded. Even Interrogator Maxis coordinated orbital logistics, ensuring the arriving refugees were processed and distributed to whatever ships could accommodate them. But it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. 4 hours in, Kara's strength finally gave out. She landed on the battle barge's deck with her latest group of refugees and simply collapsed, her body refusing to respond to her commands. Sister Hospitaller rushed forward, their Medici training useless against alien physiology, but their compassion universal. "She needs solar exposure," one of them said, studying Kara with instruments that beeped confusedly at Kryptonian biology. "Her cells are depleted beyond safe operating levels." 2 hours remaining, Canoness Severina said grimly, and Inquisitor Kroll has confirmed cyclonic torpedo launch authorization. Whatever, we cannot evacuate in that time. "We'll burn," Kara finished, forcing herself to sit up despite every muscle screaming in protest. "How many have we saved?" Counting all vessels, all shuttles, all evacuation efforts. Severina consulted a data slate. Approximately 93,000. Less than 2% of the total population. 93,000 lives. Under normal circumstances, Kara would have celebrated saving that many people. But set against the 6,900,000 who would die, "I failed," she whispered. "No," Vorn's voice came over the Vox. He'd remained planetside, coordinating ground efforts. "You saved 93,000 people who would have died. That's not failure, that's miracle." "It's not enough," Kara insisted. "I should have been stronger, faster, should have been a god." Severina knelt beside her. "Child, even the Emperor himself cannot save everyone. The galaxy is too vast, the threats too numerous. We save who we can, we fight where we stand, and we accept that sometimes our best efforts result in tragedy." Kara looked at the Canoness, this woman who believed so deeply in a god-emperor she'd never met, who dedicated her life to protecting people in a universe that seemed designed to make such protection impossible. "How do you keep going?" Kara asked. "How do you fight, day after day, knowing you can't win?" Severina smiled sadly. "Because someone must. Because the alternative, surrendering to despair, means the darkness wins without a fight. We are not measured by our victories, but by our refusal to stop trying." 2 hours later, the cyclonic torpedoes launched. Kara watched from the battle barge's observation deck as 6 massive warheads descended toward Vardis Prime. They struck simultaneously, precision weapons designed for planetary annihilation. The detonations created a chain reaction in the planet's core, destabilizing tectonic plates and triggering volcanic eruptions across the entire surface. Within minutes, Vardis Prime was dying. Within hours, it would be a lifeless ball of molten rock, and 6,900,000 people died with it. Kara felt each death like a physical blow, her super hearing catching the final moments before the firestorm consumed everything, screams, prayers, last words spoken to loved ones who couldn't hear them. She wanted to look away, to spare herself the horror, but felt she owed them the dignity of witnessing. These people deserved to be mourned. "Exterminatus complete." Kroll's voice was emotionless over the Vox. "Vardis Prime is cleansed. The Tyranid contamination is purged." Kara said nothing. What was there to say? That she hated them, that their calculus of acceptable sacrifice made her sick, that she could never accept a universe where burning millions alive was considered cleansing. And they already knew, and they didn't care. "The entity designated Supergirl is hereby classified as Unresolved Threat Level Secundus," Kroll continued. "Recommendation for permanent containment and study pending inquisitorial review. Canoness Severina, you will maintain custody of the xenos entity until—" "No," Severina interrupted. "By ancient compact between the Inquisition and the Adepta Sororitas, I invoke the right of sanctuary. This being has demonstrated purity of purpose and selfless action. She is under my protection until such time as her nature can be properly determined." Silence on the Vox. Then, "Your objection is noted, Canoness, but this is not concluded. The Inquisition will send representatives to interview the entity, and if she is found wanting—" The threat hung unspoken in the void. Kara stood, her body still weak but recovering slowly under the unfiltered solar radiation streaming through the observation port. She looked at Severina. "Thank you," she said quietly. "But I won't hide behind sanctuary. I won't be studied like a lab specimen, and I definitely won't let them lock me up." "Then what will you do?" Severina asked. Kara looked at the burning remains of Vardis Prime, at the refugee ships carrying the 93,000 she'd managed to save, at the vast darkness of space stretching in every direction. "I'm going to figure out this universe," she said. "Going to learn its rules, its factions, its threats. And then I'm going to find a way to change it." Severina's expression was unreadable. "The 41st millennium has broken greater beings than you, child. What makes you think one person can make a difference?" Kara's eyes blazed with renewed determination, her Kryptonian cells slowly rebuilding their solar reserves. "Because I'm not from the 41st millennium," she said. "I'm from a place where hope isn't heresy, where saving lives isn't tactical error, where one person can make a difference." She looked directly at Severina. "And I'm going to teach this universe to remember what that means." The battle barge Faith's Deliverance hung in orbit above what remained of Vardis Prime, a slowly cooling sphere of magma that had been a living world hours before. Kara stood in the Canoness's private chapel, surrounded by imagery of a golden warrior god she didn't recognize, but whose followers seemed to take very seriously. Severina knelt before a massive altar, her power armor removed to reveal the simple black body glove beneath. She'd been praying for 20 minutes straight, her lips moving in silent recitation of what Kara's super hearing identified as names. Thousands of names. "The dead of Vardis Prime," Severina explained without looking up. "Every soul I can remember from our brief time evacuating. I commit them to the Emperor's care, hoping that in death they find the peace denied to them in life." Kara shifted uncomfortably, because she'd never been particularly religious. Krypton had moved past such things centuries before its destruction, replacing faith with science. But watching this woman pray with such genuine conviction made her feel small somehow, like she'd missed something important about the universe. "Do you really believe there's an afterlife?" Kara asked. "That those people are somewhere better now?" Severina finally looked up, her face showing the exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting for 3 straight days. "I must believe it, because if this life, with all its cruelty, its endless war, its casual extermination of billions, is all there is, then the galaxy truly is without hope." She stood, joints audibly popping. "You asked me earlier how we keep going. The answer is faith. Not blind faith. I have seen too much horror to believe the Emperor protects without our own efforts, but faith that our struggles mean something, that the sacrifices are not in vain. Even when 6 million people burn," Kara's voice was harder than she intended. "Especially then," Severina replied, "because if their deaths mean nothing, if we learn nothing from this tragedy, then we insult their memory. I choose to believe we saved 93,000 because the Emperor guided your hand, that those deaths were not meaningless but served to preserve others." Kara wanted to argue, wanted to point out the logical fallacy of praising a god for saving a tiny fraction while allowing the majority to die. But she could see the need in Severina's eyes, the desperate requirement to find meaning in senseless loss. "I'm not divine," Kara said instead. "I'm not sent by your Emperor or anyone else. I'm just lost, trying to do the right thing in a universe where right seems to mean something completely different than it did back home." "Perhaps that is exactly what divinity looks like," Severina mused. "Not omnipotence, but the willingness to try despite impossible odds. Not perfection, but the refusal to accept that cruelty is inevitable." Before Kara could respond, alarms blared throughout the ship. Severina's expression hardened instantly, the exhausted woman replaced by a seasoned warrior in the span of a heartbeat. "Battle stations," she commanded, already moving toward her armor. "What is it?" A sister's voice crackled over the vox. "Canonis, we have multiple warp breaches detected at the edge of the system, identifying signatures as Emperor Preserve Us. It's a Black Legion raiding party. 3 cruisers and a dozen escort vessels. They're heading directly for our position." Kara's enhanced hearing picked up panicked chatter from other ships in the system. "Chaos Fleet inbound. All vessels, prepare for combat. Request immediate reinforcement from..." The Vox channels dissolved into static, and Kara felt something wrong wash over her senses. It was like the psychic pressure from the Swarmlord, but different, more malevolent, more aware. This wasn't alien intelligence studying her as a curiosity. This was something that looked at her and saw prey. "The Black Legion," Severina explained as she donned her power armor with practiced efficiency. "Traitor space marines who turned from the Emperor's light 10,000 years ago. So they serve the ruinous powers. Demons from beyond reality who feed on suffering and corruption." "Demons," Kara repeated flatly. "You're telling me actual, literal demons exist in this universe?" "The warp is home to entities of pure malevolence," Severina said, her voice grim. "Beings that were old when humanity was young, that have watched civilizations rise and fall for eons. They corrupt, they destroy, they feast on mortal souls, and the Black Legion are their champions, space marines who sold their souls for dark power." Kara's X-ray vision pierced through the ship's hull, focusing on the approaching vessels. Even at this distance, she could see they were wrong. Ships that looked like they'd been grown as much as built, covered in spikes and symbols that hurt to look at. And aboard them, the heat signatures that didn't match any biology she'd encountered. Some were too hot, burning with internal fires that should have consumed their bodies. Others were too cold, existing at temperatures below freezing despite being in normal atmosphere. A few didn't register temperature at all, as if they existed outside normal thermodynamic laws. "They're not coming for Varda's Prime," Kara observed. "The planet's already dead. So why are they here?" Severina's expression was answer enough. "They're coming for you. The warp is home to entities that see across time and space. They watched your battle with the Swarmlord, witnessed a being of immense power newly arrived in this galaxy, with no allegiances, no protections, no understanding of the threats she faces. They want to corrupt me," Kara realized with growing dread, "or turn me into whatever they are. Or destroy you if corruption fails," Severina confirmed. "The ruinous powers cannot abide unclaimed power. You represent a threat to their designs, a variable they cannot control. They will attempt to turn you, and failing that, eliminate you." The lead Chaos cruiser fired across the void, not at Faith's deliverance, but at the civilian refugee ships. Macro cannons tore through unarmored vessels with contemptuous ease. Thousands of the people Kara had risked everything to save simply ceased to exist as explosive shells vaporized their ships. "No," Kara screamed, already moving toward the airlock. Severina grabbed her arm, a futile gesture given the strength difference, but the intent was clear. "You cannot save them all. The moment you leave this ship, you become vulnerable to warp corruption. The demons will..." "I don't care about demons." Kara tore free, her eyes blazing. "Those are the people I saved. I carried them out of hell, and I'm not letting some new monsters kill them." She blasted through the airlock without waiting for decompression protocols, the explosive outgassing barely registering as she accelerated toward the Chaos fleet. Behind her, she heard Severina shouting orders to engage the enemy, to provide covering fire, but Kara wasn't listening. All she could see was another refugee ship exploding, another 1,000 lives snuffed out because she hadn't been fast enough, strong enough. The lead Chaos cruiser turned its weapons toward her as she closed the distance. Last batteries and plasma cannons filled space with lethal energy, but Kara dodged through the fire with desperate speed. She slammed into the ship's hull and began tearing through it with her bare hands, ripping adamantium plating like paper, burrowing into the vessel's guts with single-minded fury. Inside, she found hell made manifest. The corridors were wrong. Geometry that twisted at impossible angles, dimensions that shouldn't exist within three-dimensional space. The air itself was thick with corruption, a psychic miasma that made her Kryptonian senses scream warnings. And the things that crewed this vessel. They had been space marines once. 8 feet tall, encased in power armor that was fused to their bodies, but mutation had claimed them. Extra arms sprouted from shoulders, faces split into fanged maws, eyes multiplied across helmets. Some had wings of leathery flesh. Others trailed tentacles that writhed independently. And when they all turned to look at her with expressions of pure, sadistic glee. "Fresh meat," one bellowed, its voice distorted by warp corruption. "The dark gods have blessed us, a new soul to break." Kara didn't bother with words. She hit the nearest Chaos Marine at full speed, her fist crushing through corrupted ceramite and into the twisted flesh beneath. The warrior exploded in a spray of ichor that hissed where it touched the walls, eating through metal like acid. The others attacked as a coordinated unit, their movements enhanced by demonic possession. Chain axes screamed to life, their teeth wreathed in unholy fire. Bolters roared, firing rounds that exploded with more than simple kinetic force, each detonation carrying a psychic payload that made Kara's skin crawl. She fought like a demon herself. Her depleted solar reserves pushed beyond safe limits. Every punch shattered armor. Every kick sent corrupted warriors flying, her heat vision carved through bulkheads and bodies alike. But they kept coming, and worse, they were laughing, actually enjoying the combat, reveling in violence like it was the highest form of worship. "This one has spirit," the largest Chaos Marine, apparently their leader, roared with delight. "Khorne will be pleased. Break her, make her bleed. Show her that hope is a lie and violence is truth." A chain fist caught Kara across the ribs, its teeth chewing through her costume and actually drawing blood. The pain was shocking, not because it hurt particularly badly, but because it hurt at all. Her invulnerability should have stopped that attack cold. Then she felt it, corruption seeping through the wound. A warp energy trying to invade her cellular structure. Her Kryptonian biology fought back automatically, solar radiation burning away the taint, but she could feel the struggle. Could feel something alien and malevolent trying to take root in her body. "You feel it, don't you?" the leader hissed, his voice suddenly intimate despite the battle raging around them. "The touch of the warp, the promise of power beyond your comprehension. Join us, little goddess. Embrace chaos, and you will never know weakness again." "Never," Kara spat, unleashing her heat vision directly into the leader's helmet. The beams punched through corrupted metal and cooked the brain within. The Chaos Marine laughed as he died, his last words carrying across Vox channels. "So be it. If you will not join willingly, we shall break you. Ours and broken things are so much more useful than whole ones." His body collapsed, but the psychic pressure in the ship intensified. The walls began to bleed, actual blood seeping from metal that shouldn't be capable of such biological functions. The geometry twisted further, space folding in on itself until Kara couldn't tell which direction was up. And through the chaos, something else emerged. Something that made every instinct in her Kryptonian brain scream to flee. It was roughly humanoid in shape, but that's where any resemblance to natural life ended. Its skin was brass and flame, its eyes were pits of infinite hunger, and its presence radiated pure, distilled rage. Not anger at any specific thing, just rage as a fundamental force of nature. A demon, an actual demon from the warp, manifested into reality through the deaths and suffering aboard this ship. "Kryptonian," it spoke, and its voice was the sound of civilizations burning. "You who carry the light of stars within your flesh, you who refuse to kneel, you will make a fine offering to the blood god." The demon attacked, and Kara realized with cold horror that this thing was as strong as she was. Maybe stronger. Its fist connected with her jaw and sent her crashing through 3 bulkheads, each impact driving her further into the ship's corrupted depths. She tried to fight back, tried to use her heat vision, but the demons simply absorbed the energy and grew larger, feeding on the violence itself. Yes, it roared with ecstasy. Struggle, resist, make the kill meaningful. Kara was losing. For the first time since arriving in this universe, she was genuinely, not completely, losing. The demon was stronger, faster, and fed by the very act of combat. Every blow she landed made it more powerful. Every wound she inflicted healed instantly. And worse, she could feel her own anger building, rage at this universe for being so fundamentally broken, fury at the Imperium for their cruelty, hatred for the Tyranids and chaos and everything that made this place a living nightmare. The demon smiled, sensing her emotional state. Yes, let the anger consume you. Let it fill your heart. Embrace the rage, and I will grant you the power to remake this galaxy in your image. For a terrible moment, Kara almost considered it. Almost let herself give in to the fury, the frustration, the desperate need to hurt something the way she'd been hurt by this universe's cruelty. Then she heard it, faint but unmistakable. A child's voice, transmitted over Vox from one of the refugee ships. Please, someone help us. The monsters are coming. We're scared. And just like that, the rage drained away, replaced by something the demon couldn't understand, couldn't feed on, couldn't corrupt. Compassion. Not as weakness, but as strength. The determination to protect not because of anger, but because people mattered. No, Kara said quietly, and her eyes began to glow with pure, uncorrupted light. You want to know what I embrace? Hope, kindness, the belief that even in the darkest universe, one person can make a difference. The demon recoiled, actually retreating from her advancing form. Impossible. No mortal can resist the warp's call. No being of flesh can defy. Kara grabbed the demon by its burning throat and squeezed. I'm not from your warp. I'm not from your universe, and I don't play by your rules. She flew straight up, carrying the struggling demon through deck after deck, through the ship's hull, out into the void of space, and then she flew directly into the system's sun, dragging the demon with her. The creature screamed, a psychic wail that echoed across the warp itself, as stellar radiation burned away its corrupted form. It tried to retreat back to the Imperium, but Kara held on with grim determination, absorbing solar energy, even as she used her body as an anchor to keep the demon trapped in reality. You wanted to see what happens when hope meets your darkness, she said through gritted teeth. Here's your answer. The demon dissolved into constituent warp energy, scattered across the stellar winds, too dispersed to ever reform. And Ankara floated in the sun's corona, her solar reserves fully replenished, her costume in tatters but her spirit unbroken. She'd won. Against impossible odds, against an enemy designed to corrupt everything it touched, she'd won. Now she just had to save the rest of those refugee ships before the remaining Chaos Fleet finished them off. Kara erupted from the sun's corona like a goddess of war, her body saturated with stellar radiation, her eyes blazing with power that made the vacuum itself seem to ripple. The remaining Chaos cruisers were systematically destroying refugee ships. 2 had already been reduced to expanding clouds of debris, and a 3rd was venting atmosphere from a dozen hull breaches. She crossed the distance in seconds, her cape streaming behind her like a banner of defiance against the darkness. The nearest Chaos cruiser tried to turn its weapons toward her, but she was already past its firing solutions, already through its hull and into its corrupted interior. This time, she didn't waste energy fighting the crew. She went straight for the ship's reactor, a writhing mass of tortured machinery and warp corruption that pulsed with unholy power. as her heat vision carved through shielding and containment fields, and her fists tore apart the mechanisms that kept the reactor stable. The Chaos cruiser exploded from within, its reactor breach creating a miniature sun that consumed the vessel in seconds. Kara rode the shockwave toward the second cruiser, using the explosion's momentum to add velocity to her charge. The second ship tried to flee, its warp drives beginning to spin up for emergency translation. But Kara was faster. She grabbed onto the cathedral-like structure jutting from its prow and pulled, her Kryptonian strength tearing the entire superstructure free. The ship tumbled out of control, its crew screaming over Vox channels as their vessel spiraled toward Vardis Prime's molten surface. The third and final cruiser, the one she'd initially boarded, was attempting to escape while firing its rear batteries at Faith's deliverance. Severina's battle barge was holding its own, but the Chaos vessel's weapons were punching through its void shields with each volley. Kara flew in front of the battle barge and simply stopped, positioning herself between the Sororitas ship and the incoming fire. Macro cannon shells exploded against her body harmlessly. Las beams scattered off her skin like rain. The Chaos vessel poured everything it had into her, and she absorbed it all without flinching. "Canoness," she transmitted over Vox, her voice steady despite standing in the path of a warship's full broadside. "Get the refugee ships out of here. Jump to whatever safe system you can reach. I'll deal with this one." "Supergirl, that vessel still has thousands of traitor Marines aboard," Severina warned. "You cannot—" "Yes, I can," Kara interrupted. "Trust me." She accelerated toward the Chaos cruiser, building speed until she was moving at a significant fraction of light speed. At the last moment, she rotated and drove both feet into the ship's hull with the combined force of her mass, velocity, and Kryptonian strength. The impact created a shock wave that traveled through the entire vessel's superstructure. Bulkheads collapsed, decks compressed into each other. The ship's spine, the massive keel that held the kilometer-long vessel together, simply snapped like a rotten tree branch. The Chaos cruiser broke apart, its two halves tumbling away from each other. Atmosphere vented in great plumes. Bodies, corrupted and screaming, spilled into the void. And through it all, Ankara methodically destroyed every critical system, every escape pod, every piece of equipment that could pose a threat. She wasn't being cruel, wasn't taking pleasure in the destruction. But she'd learned her lesson from the Tyranids. Leaving enemies alive just gave them data to evolve from. Better to ensure the threat was completely eliminated. Within 10 minutes, the Black Legion raiding party was nothing but debris scattered across Vardis Prime's orbit. And Kara floated amid the wreckage, her costume tattered beyond recognition, her cape completely gone, but victorious. "All refugee ships, this is Supergirl," she transmitted. "The threat is neutralized. You're safe. Canoness Severina will coordinate your evacuation to secure systems. You're going to survive this." The Vox channels exploded with responses. Thanks, prayers, weeping relief from people who'd thought they were about to die for the second time in as many days. Kara listened to each one, cataloging the voices, the names, the gratitude. 93,000 people, minus the 2,000 who died when the Chaos Fleet destroyed those two ships. 91,000 souls who would live to see another day because she'd refused to give up. It wasn't enough, would never be enough. But it was something. Faith's deliverance approached, its launch bay opening to receive her. Kara flew inside, landing on the deck with exhaustion finally catching up to her. Sister Hospitaller rushed forward again, their instruments still confused by her alien biology, but their concern genuine. Severina approached, her power armor scorched from the battle, but her expression unreadable. "So you destroyed an entire Chaos raiding party. Single-handedly, without support, without hesitation." She paused. "The Inquisition is going to have questions." "Let them ask," Kara said tiredly. "I'm done hiding what I can do. Done pretending to be less than I am to make people comfortable." "That is surprisingly wise." Severina admitted. In this universe, power attracts both worship and fear. You will need to decide which you prefer. Neither, Kara said firmly. I don't want to be worshipped, and I won't live in fear of people being scared of me. I just want to help, to save people, to make this universe a little less dark. Severina was quiet for a long moment. Then, the Imperium will never accept you. You represent change, hope, individual power over institutional authority. Everything the system is designed to suppress. Then I won't work within the system, Kara replied. I'll work around it. Find the places where help is needed most, where the Imperium's rules create more suffering than they prevent. And I'll do what I do best, save people, one crisis at a time. You will make enemies, Severina warned. Powerful enemies, the Inquisition, the Ecclesiarchy, perhaps even the High Lords of Terror themselves. I've made enemies before, Kara said with a tired smile. I can handle it. And allies? Severina asked. Will you accept help from those who believe in your mission? Kara looked at the canoness, this warrior nun who'd risked her own standing to protect a stranger, who'd coordinated evacuation efforts despite knowing the mathematics were impossible. So who'd stood between Kara and the Inquisition's judgment. Yeah, Kara said softly. I think I could use some allies. Over the next 3 weeks, as Faith's deliverance traveled through the warp toward a sector designated for refugee resettlement, Kara learned more about the 41st millennium than she'd ever wanted to know. She learned about the Imperium's vast bureaucracy, a system so massive that worlds could fall without anyone noticing for decades. She learned about the constant warfare that consumed trillions of lives every year. She learned about the other threats beyond Tyranids and chaos. The Necrons, ancient machines older than human civilization. The Orcs, a species that literally fed on violence. The Tau, idealistic xenos who believed in unity but enforced it with weapons. The Eldar, and dying remnants of a once great empire who viewed humanity as primitive vermin. And she learned that for all the Imperium's cruelty, for all its casual disregard for individual lives, it was genuinely the only thing standing between humanity and complete extinction. The galaxy is hostile, Severina explained during one of their many conversations. Every species wants humanity dead or enslaved. The Imperium's methods are brutal because gentle methods don't survive. Compassion is a luxury we cannot afford. That's what they want you to believe, Kara countered. That cruelty is necessary. That hope is weakness. But I've seen what happens when people refuse to accept that, when they fight for something better despite impossible odds. And what happened? Severina asked. They won, Kara said simply. Not always, not permanently, but often enough that it mattered, often enough that the universe became a little bit better. Severina smiled sadly. This is not your universe, child. The rules here are different. Then I'll change the rules, Kara replied with absolute certainty. The refugee resettlement went smoothly, all things considered. The 91,000 survivors of Vardus Prime were distributed across 3 agri-worlds in the Obscurus sector, each one desperate for additional labor and willing to overlook the survivors' potential Tyranid contamination in exchange for productive workers. Kara watched from orbit as the last shuttle descended, carrying families to new homes on worlds they'd never heard of before today. It wasn't perfect. The Imperium's resettlement policies were harsh, and many of these people would face discrimination as refugees from a lost world. But they were alive. They had a future, and that was worth celebrating. What will you do now? Severina asked. They stood together on Faith's Deliverance's observation deck, watching the stars drift past. Keep moving, Kara said. Keep helping where I can. Keep learning about this universe and how to navigate it without compromising who I am. The Inquisition will hunt you, Severina warned. Inquisitor Lord Kroll has issued a sector-wide alert. You are classified as a threat-level extremist. Any Imperial forces that encounter you are authorized to engage with lethal force. I know, Kara acknowledged, but I can't let that stop me. Too many people need help. Too many voices are crying out for someone, anyone, to care about them as individuals instead of statistics. Severina reached into her armor and withdrew a small data slate. Then take this. Coordinates for worlds where the Imperium's presence is minimal, but threats are significant. Places where someone with your abilities could make a real difference. Places where the authorities won't immediately try to kill you. Kara took the slate, touched by the gesture. You're helping me defy the Inquisition. That could get you declared a heretic. Perhaps, Severina said with a slight smile. But I have spent my entire life fighting for the Emperor's vision of humanity, and I cannot believe that vision includes allowing millions to suffer when help is available. If that makes me a heretic, she shrugged. Then I will face the Emperor's judgment with a clear conscience. Thank you, Kara said quietly, for everything. For the sanctuary, for the help with evacuation, for believing I could be more than a threat. Thank you, Severina replied, for reminding me that miracles still exist, that hope is not just a word in ancient texts, that one person with sufficient courage and power can indeed make a difference. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars. Then Severina spoke again, her voice contemplative. There is a legend, she said, from the earliest days of the Imperium, of the Emperor himself walking among mortals, appearing in moments of desperate need to turn the tide of battle. They called him the Golden Warrior, the savior in the dark. She looked at Kara directly. You came through a tear in reality, you're wreathed in golden light at the exact moment Vardis Prime needed salvation. You fought impossible odds and won. You saved 91,000 people from certain death. Tell me, is that not the behavior of a saint? Of divine intervention? Kara shook her head. I'm not divine, Severina. I'm just a Kryptonian who got lost. Everything I did, any human could have done with the right abilities. And yet you did it, Severina pressed. Not someone else. Not the Imperium with all its armies and weapons. You, an impossible being arriving at an impossible moment to accomplish impossible tasks. She smiled. If that is not the Emperor's hand at work, then I do not understand faith at all. Believe what you need to believe, Kara said gently. But I know the truth. I'm not sent by anyone. I'm just someone trying to do good in a universe that makes it really, really hard. Then we are alike in that, Severina said. Sisters in purpose, if not in faith. 3 days later, Kara prepared to leave Faith's Deliverance. Severina had provided her with basic supplies, a Vox communicator tuned to encrypted sororitas frequencies, a data slate containing Imperial charts and threat assessments, and a new cape fashioned from blessed cloth that the sisters swore would provide protection against warp corruption. Where will you go first? Severina asked as they stood in the launch bay. Kara consulted the data slate. There's a hive world called Icarus 7. Reports of a cult uprising, but the Imperium considers it low priority because the world's tithe production is minimal. Estimated civilian casualties, if left unchecked, 3 million. 3 million, Severina repeated. And the Imperium does nothing because it is not economically efficient. Exactly, Kara said, her jaw tightening. Which means it's exactly the kind of place I need to be. She rose into the air, hovering near the open bay doors. I'll stay in touch, let you know where I'm going, what I find. And if you ever need help, if the sororitas ever face a threat too big to handle alone, call me. I'll come. The same offer stands for you, Severina replied. The Order of the Valorous Heart will provide sanctuary and support where we can. You are not alone in this galaxy, Kara Zor-El. Remember that. Kara smiled. The first genuine, warm smile she'd managed since arriving in this universe. I will, thank you, sister. She accelerated out of the launch bay, into the void, toward Icarus 7 and whatever crisis awaited there. Behind her, Faith's deliverance grew smaller, eventually disappearing among the stars. But Kara didn't look back. Her eyes were fixed forward, toward the next world that needed saving, toward the next impossible crisis that everyone else had written off as acceptable loss. 3 months later, Inquisitor Lord Vanesh Kroll sat in his command throne aboard the Righteous Condemnation, reviewing reports with growing frustration. The entity designated Supergirl had become a sector-wide phenomenon. Icarus 7. Cult uprising suppressed with minimal civilian casualties. Local population reported a golden angel destroying cult strongholds while evacuating innocents. Imperial forces arrived to find the crisis already resolved. De mordia secundus. Orc walk intercepted before reaching populated centers. Survivors reported a female warrior who fought like 100 space marines and could burn the greenskins with her eyes. Talan Delta, genestealer infestation purged from mining colonies. The entity apparently identified infected individuals with uncanny accuracy and separated them from healthy population before orbital bombardment was necessary. Every incident followed the same pattern. Supergirl arrived at low-priority threats the Imperium had deemed acceptable losses, resolved the crisis with minimal casualties, and vanished before Imperial forces could capture or study her. "She's making us look incompetent," Kroll muttered. "Every world she saves is a world we wrote off. Every life she preserves is an implicit criticism of our doctrine." His second-in-command, interrogator Maxis, stood at attention beside the throne. "Recommendation, my lord, increase the threat classification. Authorize extreme measures for capture or termination." Kroll considered it. The entity was undeniably dangerous. Power equivalent to a Primarch, perhaps greater in some aspects. Uncontrolled, unpredictable, guided only by her own moral compass rather than Imperial authority. But she was also effective. Threats that would have cost millions of lives and years of resources were being resolved in days. Worlds remained productive, their populations grateful, their faith in the Emperor's protection ironically strengthened by an entity that refused to acknowledge the Emperor's authority. "No," Kroll said finally. "We continue observation, continue cataloging her capabilities and patterns, but we do not escalate to termination protocols." "My lord?" Maxis sounded surprised. "She is a tool," Kroll explained. "Uncontrolled, yes, but effective. Let her handle the crises we lack resources to address. Let her be the Imperium's unwitting agent in sectors too remote for proper oversight. And when she finally encounters a threat beyond her capabilities," he smiled coldly, "we will be ready to collect the pieces and determine her true nature." "And if she never encounters such a threat?" Maxis asked. Kroll's smile widened. "Then the Imperium benefits from a free asset, requiring no maintenance, no supplies, no loyalty oaths. Either way, we win." On the surface of a world designated only as Omega-7, Kara stood atop a ruined Promethium refinery and watching the sun set over toxic wastelands. The local population, barely 5,000 survivors of a planetary war fought centuries ago, had begged for help against mutant raiders from the ash wastes. The Imperium had ignored their pleas. The world produced nothing of value, held no strategic importance. The survivors were beneath notice, but Kara had come anyway, had fought the mutants, had helped rebuild defenses, had shown these forgotten people that someone, somewhere, gave a damn about their survival. "Thank you," the settlement elder had said, tears streaming down his radiation-scarred face. "The Emperor sent you to us, a saint in our darkest hour." Kara hadn't corrected him, hadn't explained about Krypton or dimensional travel or the random accident that had brought her here. She just smiled and told him to take care of his people. Now, alone on the refinery, she allowed herself a moment of doubt. Was she really making a difference? Or was she just putting band-aids on a galaxy-sized wound? The Imperium would never change. The threats would never stop coming. And she was just one person against an entire universe of darkness. But then she remembered Severina's words. We are not measured by our victories, but by our refusal to stop trying. Kara looked up at the stars, countless billions of them, each one potentially orbited by worlds full of people who needed help. The scale was overwhelming, impossible, the kind of challenge that should have made anyone sane give up. She smiled. Impossible just means it takes a little longer, she said to the stars. And I've got nothing but time. She rose into the air, her cape, the blessed one from the Sororitas, streaming behind her. Through her super hearing, she could already detect distress calls from 3 different systems. Pirates raiding agri convoys, a demon incursion on a shrine world, a Tyranid splinter fleet approaching an underhive colony. So many crises. So many people who needed saving. So many chances to prove that hope wasn't heresy, that compassion wasn't weakness, that one person could make a difference. The 41st millennium had tried to break her, had thrown Tyranids and demons and orbital bombardments at her, had shown her cruelty elevated to doctrine, suffering accepted as inevitable, death calculated as acceptable loss. And she'd survived it all, learned from it, adapted to it. But she hadn't been changed by it, hadn't let this universe's darkness snuff out the light she carried from another reality. Kara Zor-El, the last daughter of Krypton, accelerated toward the next crisis, toward the next impossible battle against overwhelming odds, toward the next world that everyone else had written off. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, someone needed to fight for peace. Someone needed to be hope's champion in a galaxy that had forgotten what hope meant. Someone needed to show the 41st millennium that even eternal war can be interrupted by one person who refuses to stop trying. And that someone was Supergirl. In the depths of the warp, ancient entities that had witnessed the birth and death of galaxies paused in their endless machinations. A new variable had entered the equation, and a being of light from beyond their reality, carrying powers that didn't bend to the warp's corruption, guided by principles that made her fundamentally incompatible with their designs. She was annoying, disruptive, a statistical anomaly that kept producing improbable outcomes. They would need to watch her, study her, understand her, and eventually, inevitably, find the weakness that all mortal beings possessed. But for now, in this moment, the dark gods felt something they had not experienced in eons: uncertainty. And in the Imperium, on worlds numbered in the millions, people who had never heard of Krypton or Superman or Earth began to whisper stories. Stories of a golden warrior who appeared in moments of desperate need. Stories of impossible rescues and miraculous victories. Stories of hope incarnate. So the Imperium would try to suppress these stories, would label them heresy, would insist that only the Emperor's grace provided salvation. But stories, once told, have power of their own, and hope, once kindled, is extraordinarily difficult to extinguish. The 41st millennium would never be the same. Not because one person could save everyone, no being possessed that power, not even the Emperor himself in his prime. But because one person proved that saving anyone was still worth the effort. That compassion hadn't died in this dark age. That the impossible remained possible for those brave enough to try. Kara Zor-El had become Supergirl to honor her cousin's legacy, to carry forward the values of Krypton and Earth, to be a symbol of hope in a world that desperately needed one. Now she would be Supergirl for an entire galaxy, not to replace the Emperor or reform the Imperium or solve problems that had plagued humanity for 10,000 years, just to show up when needed, fight when called, save who she could, and remind the universe that darkness, no matter how deep or eternal, could never completely extinguish light. Because she was the last daughter of Krypton, because she had crossed dimensions and survived impossible odds, because she carried within her cells the power of stars and within her heart the unshakable conviction that every life mattered. And that conviction, more than any superpower, more than any weapon, more than any army, was the most dangerous threat the grim darkness of the far future had ever faced. In the 41st millennium, there is only war, but now, impossibly, miraculously, defiantly, there is also hope. And hope has a name: Supergirl. More legends await in the dark millennium. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.